I set out early one morning on a hiking trip that I thought would be like all the others I had done before, simple, peaceful, and routine. I had no idea that it would turn into something I would never forget, something that still haunts me when I close my eyes at night. I wanted a challenge, so I chose a trail deep in the mountains that I had never been to before. The path was supposed to be a tough one, with steep climbs and thick forest, but that was exactly why I wanted it. I needed to push myself. The air was crisp and cool as I started up the trail, with the sun just beginning to rise, casting long shadows through the trees. The forest was dense, filled with tall pines and thick underbrush. I could hear birds calling here and there and the occasional rustle of small animals in the bushes. It was quiet, but not the peaceful kind of quiet, more like the kind that made you notice every small sound and wonder what made it. I kept my pace steady, my boots crunching on the dry leaves and twigs scattered on the ground. As I climbed higher, the trail grew narrower and rockier. I had to be careful where I stepped. The trees grew closer together, their branches tangled above me, blocking out much of the sunlight. I noticed the air growing colder and damper, and a faint smell of wet earth filled my nose. At one point, I crossed a small stream, the water running clear and cold over the stones. The sound of the water was soothing, but it didn't last long before the silence returned. The further I went, the more isolated I felt. There were no other hikers around, no signs of recent human activity. The only tracks I saw were animal prints, deer, maybe a bear or two. I was carrying my backpack with water, food, and some basic gear, but I felt a little uneasy. The trail markers were getting harder to spot, some of them faded or knocked down, and I realized that I was probably off the main path. I wasn't too worried at first. I thought I could find my way back easily enough. But as the hours passed, the sun climbed higher, and my surroundings became more unfamiliar. At one point, I reached a clearing that opened up to a steep slope covered in loose rocks and dirt. The drop below was sharp, and I had to carefully edge around it. I kept thinking about how far I had come without seeing anyone. The forest was thick in every direction. The feeling of being watched crept in slowly, like a cold finger tracing my spine. I told myself it was just my imagination, nerves getting the better of me, but the feeling wouldn't go away. I decided to take a short break, sitting down on a fallen log to catch my breath and drink some water. I looked around and noticed something odd. A patch of ground that seemed disturbed, like someone had recently dug there. There were no tools, no footprints, just the broken earth and scattered leaves. I tried to shake off the uneasy feeling but kept glancing around nervously. I packed up and continued, trying to follow what I thought was the trail, but soon I realized that the path disappeared entirely. There was no clear way forward. I could either try to backtrack or push through the thick brush to find another way. I chose to keep moving forward, hoping to find a road or a clearer trail. The forest grew darker as the day wore on. The trees were so close that hardly any light reached the ground. My legs were scratched from the branches and thorny bushes. I started to feel tired, but there was no sign of civilization. The sun began to drop toward the horizon, and I knew I needed to find a safe place to set up camp before dark. I didn't have a flashlight or any extra gear for night hiking, so I had to act fast. Eventually, I found a small flat area with enough space to pitch my tent. I worked quickly, my hands trembling from exhaustion and nerves. The shadows around me seemed to move in the fading light, and every little sound, an owl hooting, a twig snapping, the wind brushing through the leaves, felt amplified. I double-checked my tent stakes, made sure my water bottle was close, and prepared a small fire using dry wood I found nearby. The firelight gave me a small sense of security, but it didn't chase away the unease that settled deep inside me. As night fell, the forest became a different place. The sounds changed. Instead of birds, I heard distant howls, maybe coyotes or wolves, I wasn't sure. The wind picked up, carrying strange noises that I couldn't place. I stayed close to my fire, scanning the darkness with my eyes, waiting for something to happen, but nothing came. Still, I felt like I wasn't alone. At some point, I heard something heavy moving through the brush not far from my camp. It wasn't an animal I recognized. The footsteps were too large and slow, dragging along the ground. My heart pounded in my chest, and I stayed as quiet as possible, not daring to move. The sound came closer, stopped, then moved away. I didn't see anything in the dark, but the feeling of being watched turned into fear. I knew I had to get out of there in the morning, no matter what. I didn't sleep well, waking up every hour, hearing noises and feeling cold despite the fire. When the first light of dawn finally broke through the trees, I packed up my gear quickly. I tried to follow the direction I thought was back to the main trail, but everything looked different in the daylight, and I realized I had no real idea which way to go. Hours passed as I stumbled through the forest, growing hungrier and more tired. The sun was high now, but I was lost. I had no phone signal, no way to call for help. My mind raced through all the things I should have done differently. The cold night, the strange noises, the feeling that something had been following me. None of it made sense, but I couldn't shake it. Just as I was starting to give up hope, I saw a thin column of smoke rising in the distance. It looked like someone had a campfire not too far away. I pushed myself harder, moving toward it. When I reached the source, I found a small group of hikers setting up their own camp. Relief flooded me like a wave. They helped me get water and food, and one of them had a phone with a signal. I called for help and explained where I was as best as I could. The rescue team arrived within an hour, and they told me that this part of the forest was known for being difficult to navigate, with many people getting lost or stranded each year. When I finally made it back to my car, the sun was setting again. I looked at the forest behind me, dark and silent. I realized that the scariest part wasn't some monster or ghost, but the loneliness, the unknown, and how easily things could go wrong when you underestimate nature. I was lucky to get out alive. That trip changed me. I still love hiking, but I never take the wilderness for granted anymore. I learned to respect how wild and dangerous it can be, even when nothing supernatural is involved. The forest doesn't have to hide ghosts to be terrifying. Sometimes the scariest thing is just being completely, utterly alone with no idea if you'll find your way back. I set out early that morning, the air crisp and the sky a pale blue with just a few wisps of cloud. I had planned this solo hike for weeks, wanted to get away from the noise of the city, the screens, the constant rush. The trail I chose was in a national forest not far from where I live, a place people said was beautiful but quiet, off the usual beaten path. I wasn't expecting anything more than a good day in the woods, maybe some wildlife, and the peace I'd been craving. The trail started easy enough. It was wide and soft with pine needles, shaded by tall trees that swayed gently in the breeze. The smell of damp earth and fresh pine filled the air, and the sounds were mostly birds and the crunch of my boots on the ground. I carried a small backpack with water, snacks, a map, a compass, and a basic first aid kit. I didn't bring a phone, wanted to disconnect completely. As I walked deeper into the forest, the trees grew thicker and the path narrower. The sun filtered through the leaves in patches, casting long shadows that moved as the branches shifted. The air grew cooler and damper. Every so often, I'd stop and listen, trying to catch sounds. Anything that wasn't the usual forest noise. I thought I heard a twig snap somewhere off to the left, but saw nothing when I looked. Probably just a squirrel or a bird. About 3 hours in, I reached a small clearing by a creek. The water was clear and cold, running over smooth stones. I sat on a fallen log to rest and ate some trail mix, taking in the quiet. From here, the map showed the trail would start to climb uphill through denser forest before opening out onto a ridge with a good view. I packed up and headed on. The climb was steep and rough. Roots and rocks made footing tricky, and I had to stop a few times to catch my breath. But the view promised to be worth it. As I neared the ridge, I noticed something odd. A faint trail branching off from the main path. It looked less traveled, almost overgrown. I didn't see it marked on my map, but curiosity pulled me toward it. It wasn't far from the ridge, maybe just a short detour. The smaller trail was narrower, with bushes brushing against my legs and branches scraping my arms. It twisted through thick undergrowth, and the canopy closed overhead, making it darker. I kept moving forward, partly because the forest was beautiful in its own way and partly because I wanted to know where this hidden path led. After about 20 minutes, I came to a fallen tree blocking the trail. It was massive, uprooted long ago, and covered in moss. I scrambled over it, careful not to slip. Beyond the tree, the ground sloped steeply down toward a ravine. From here, I could hear the sound of water again, but it was deeper and louder, like a small waterfall or rapid stream. I decided to follow the slope down carefully, hoping to find the water and maybe a good spot to rest. The earth was loose in places, and I had to test each step before putting my weight down. The sound of the water grew louder, and soon I saw a narrow stream rushing between rocks at the bottom of the ravine. It wasn't marked on the map either. The place felt remote, so much so that the usual forest sounds seemed muted. I sat on a rock near the edge of the stream and took a long drink from my bottle. Then I looked around, trying to take in everything. The trees were dense here, mostly firs and pines, with thick bushes growing along the banks. There were no paths, no signs of people, just the wild forest. That's when I first noticed something out of place. On the opposite bank, partially hidden by bushes, was a small campsite. Nothing fancy, just a worn tarp tied between two trees, some empty cans scattered nearby, and a rough fire pit. The ashes were old, but some blackened sticks lay on top as if the fire was recently put out. No tent, no sleeping bag, no gear that looked complete. Just the tarp and those few items. I didn't like it. Felt wrong somehow. This wasn't a spot people should camp. It was too hidden, almost secret. I felt a chill creep up my neck and tried to ignore it, telling myself people often leave trash or stop briefly in places like this. I stood up to head back to the main trail, but the ground beneath me was slick with wet leaves. My foot slipped and I nearly fell into the stream. I caught myself just in time, heart pounding. I glanced back at the camp once more before moving. That's when I saw the footprints. They were faint in the soft mud near the fire pit, but they were fresh. I could tell by the way the mud clung to the edges and the slight indentations in the soft earth. They were large, too large for my boots, and they weren't from one person. Several sets, overlapping, heading deeper into the forest on the far side of the stream. My skin prickled. I didn't know who they belonged to, but whoever it was had been here recently and was still nearby. I decided I needed to get back to the main trail quickly and finish the hike before it got dark. I crossed the stream carefully at a shallow spot, stepping on rocks to keep dry, and found the overgrown trail again. I moved faster now, trying to keep calm, but every crack of a twig or rustle of leaves made me tense. When I finally got back to the ridge, the sun was lower, casting longer shadows across the valley. I stopped to catch my breath and check my bearings. I was off the main path by nearly half an hour, but I still had time to reach the trailhead before dark if I hurried. That's when I noticed something else. On the ridge, carved into the bark of a tree, were rough initials and numbers. They looked fresh, the cuts sharp and bleeding sap. It was like someone had marked a code or a sign. I felt sick. It was clear now that someone had been watching the trail, maybe tracking it or worse. That small campsite was not just a forgotten stop. It was a base. Someone had been hiding out here, close enough to watch anyone hiking through. I didn't wait to think more. I started down the trail at a run, heart pounding with a mix of fear and adrenaline. The forest grew darker as the sun sank behind the hills, and the path became harder to follow in the low light. I stumbled over roots and rocks but didn't stop. The sounds of the forest changed too. More silence now, like everything was holding its breath. Finally, I reached the last stretch near the parking lot, where the trees opened to familiar gravel and the distant hum of cars. I didn't slow until I was out in the open, the sun gone behind the hills. I looked back once more into the forest. The quiet there felt heavier now, loaded with the unknown. I made it to my car with minutes to spare. I locked the doors and sat inside, heart still racing. I didn't call anyone or stay. I drove straight home, taking the safest roads and not stopping until I was inside my apartment with the door locked tight behind me. Later, I reported what I saw to the park rangers. They told me the area had been known for occasional squatters and trespassers who sometimes stayed hidden in the woods, but they hadn't had a serious incident in years. They said they'd increase patrols and look into it. I never went back to that trail. I stopped hiking alone. That day taught me how easily the forest can hide people. Not just animals or nature, but others too. And sometimes the scariest thing isn't a ghost or a monster, but knowing someone could be watching, waiting, right out there in the trees where you think you're alone. I set out early that morning, the kind of morning that feels fresh and full of promise. The sky was pale blue, just waking up, and the air was cool but not cold. I was alone, carrying only a small backpack with water, some snacks, a map, and a compass. The plan was to hike a new trail I'd found on an old hiking forum, a remote loop in a forest that few people seemed to visit. The pictures looked beautiful, and I was craving some time away from the noise of the city. The trailhead was easy enough to find. I parked my car on a gravel shoulder, pulled on my boots, and started walking. At first, the path was well-worn and clear. The ground was soft with pine needles and leaves from last fall. The forest felt peaceful. Birds sang from high in the trees, and small animals rustled in the underbrush. I passed by a slow-moving creek with clear water that reflected the sunlight in little dancing flashes. Every few minutes, I stopped to look at a flower or a moss-covered rock, or just to breathe in the smell of the damp earth. I had been walking for about 2 hours when I noticed the trail started to change. The well-worn path disappeared into rougher ground, thick with fallen branches and uneven stones. The trees grew closer together, their branches tangled like fingers blocking the sunlight. The air felt cooler here, damp and heavy. I checked my map and compass often, trying to keep on course, but the markers were faint or missing altogether. As I pressed on, the forest grew quieter. The birds stopped singing, and the small animals vanished. The only sounds were my footsteps and the occasional creak of a tree bending in the wind. I felt a strange tension building inside me, like the forest itself was holding its breath. I told myself it was just my imagination and kept moving. After a while, I realized I was losing light faster than expected. The dense trees made it seem later in the day, even though my watch said it was still early afternoon. The path twisted and turned unpredictably, and I stumbled more than once over roots hidden beneath leaves. I began to wonder if I had taken a wrong turn somewhere. Then I spotted something unusual on the ground ahead. A pile of stones, roughly stacked. I remembered reading about hikers sometimes building cairns to mark trails or special spots. But this pile looked old and deliberate, too neatly arranged to be natural. My heart beat faster as I stared at it, trying to decide if I should trust it as a signpost or avoid it. I decided to follow the direction the stones pointed, hoping it would lead me back to a clearer trail. But the deeper I went, the thicker the forest became. The trees were older, their bark cracked and darkened. Moss grew thick on everything. The ground was soggy and uneven, and every step felt heavy and slow. Suddenly, I heard a noise behind me, a crack of a branch breaking. I froze. My breath caught in my throat as I turned slowly to look. There was nothing there but shadows between the trees. I told myself it was just a deer or some small animal and took a deep breath to calm down. I started walking again, faster this time, hoping to get out of this part of the woods. Then I heard the noise again, closer now. A soft snapping of twigs, the rustle of leaves. It wasn't steady like an animal running, but more like slow, cautious footsteps. My skin prickled with fear. I glanced behind me several times, but saw only trees and shadows. I tried to keep calm. I checked my phone, hoping for signal to call for help or at least get GPS. But there was nothing. No bars, no connection. The forest had swallowed me whole. I reached a small clearing, damp and surrounded by thick brush. The sky above was still visible but graying. I sat down on a fallen log, my heart racing. I thought about the possibility that someone or something was following me. Not ghosts or monsters, just maybe another person with bad intentions. I remembered stories about hikers getting lost or worse, running into people who wanted to harm them. I took out my whistle from my pack, the one I always carried for emergencies. I blew it sharply 3 times. Then I waited, listening. Nothing. I realized I couldn't stay still. The sun was going down, and I had no idea where the trail was anymore. The air was growing colder, and the dampness was seeping through my clothes. I stood up and decided to follow the creek I had crossed earlier, thinking it might lead to the main trail or even the road. Walking alongside the creek was tricky. The ground was slippery, and the water was cold and fast-moving. I slipped once and almost fell in, my heart pounding. The forest around me seemed to close in tighter. Shadows stretched long and dark. The silence was heavy. After what felt like hours but was probably just 30 minutes, I saw a faint glow ahead, a light. At first, I thought it might be a campfire or someone's flashlight. I moved toward it cautiously. As I got closer, I realized it was actually a small cabin with a dim light in the window. Relief flooded through me. I hurried to the door and knocked, hoping someone was inside. No answer. The door was slightly open. I pushed it gently and stepped inside. The cabin was dusty and empty. No furniture, just an old stove and some broken shelves. The place looked abandoned for years. My stomach twisted. Why was the light on? I looked around and saw a lantern on a table. Its glass fogged, but no flame inside. I stepped back outside and looked around the clearing. No other signs of people. Then I noticed fresh footprints in the mud, leading away from the cabin toward the woods. I debated whether to follow them or stay put. The light gave me hope, but I didn't want to chase shadows. I decided to stay near the cabin for a while, waiting for whoever left those prints to return. Minutes passed like hours. The sun finally dipped below the trees, and darkness took over. I felt cold and alone. Suddenly, I heard a rustling sound from the trees behind me. I turned quickly and saw a man step into the clearing. He looked rough, dressed in old clothes, dirty and tired. His eyes were tired but not unfriendly. He didn't say a word, just pointed toward the trail behind the cabin. I nodded silently and followed him through the trees. The path was narrow but clear. After a few minutes, the trees thinned, and I could see the road where I had left my car. The man stopped and looked at me, then turned and disappeared back into the forest. I walked to my car, my legs shaking but moving fast. I locked the doors behind me and started the engine. The headlights cut through the darkness as I drove away from the forest. Looking back in the rearview mirror, I saw the edge of the trees, dark and still. That night, safe at home, I replayed everything in my mind. The silence in the woods, the strange pile of stones, the footsteps behind me, the empty cabin with its light, and the man who appeared from nowhere. No ghosts, no fantasy, just the raw, real fear of being lost in the wild, alone, with the unknown pressing in from every side. I learned that day how quickly nature can change from peaceful to dangerous and how important it is to be prepared, stay alert, and respect the forest's silence. More than anything, I realized that sometimes help comes from the most unexpected places. A stranger appearing in the dark, guiding you back to safety without a word. The forest is beautiful, but it is never forgiving. And when you are truly alone, it can feel like you are not alone at all, even if you are. The trail was supposed to be easy, one of those routes marked as beginner-friendly on the map, winding gently through the forest without much elevation. I had done my research, packed my bag carefully, and left early in the morning, excited for a day alone in the woods. The air was fresh and cold, the smell of pine and damp earth filling my lungs as I stepped onto the path. The first few miles went by without any trouble. The sunlight filtered softly through the tall trees, casting long shadows on the forest floor. I could hear birds calling above me, and the occasional rustle of small animals in the underbrush. My feet crunched over dry leaves and scattered twigs, the sound steady and reassuring. I kept a slow, even pace, stopping only to drink water or take a quick bite from the granola bar I had packed. After about 3 hours, the trail began to narrow. The trees grew closer together, their branches tangled in a thick canopy overhead. The light dimmed, making the woods feel quieter and cooler. I noticed that the forest floor was uneven here, with roots jutting out of the ground like thick, crooked fingers. I had to watch my step carefully to avoid tripping. At some point, the trail disappeared. I looked down at my map and GPS, trying to figure out where I had gone wrong. The device showed the path curving to the left, but in front of me, the forest stretched in all directions with no clear way forward. The underbrush was thick and thorny, making it hard to push through. I didn't panic immediately. I knew the woods could be confusing, and maybe the trail was just overgrown in places. I decided to follow what looked like a faint, narrow track heading left, hoping it would reconnect with the main path. As I moved forward, the forest grew even denser. The air felt heavier, humid in a way that didn't match the morning chill. The silence pressed in on me. The usual sounds of birds or insects were gone. I strained to listen, but all I could hear was the sound of my own breathing and the soft crunch of leaves underfoot. I reached out to brush aside branches, but something about the way the light fell made the shadows seem darker, deeper. The trees themselves seemed taller, their trunks wider, blocking out the sky completely. I tried to stay calm. I reminded myself that I had enough water and food for the day, and that if I stayed on a roughly northward course, I would eventually find the road or another trail. But as the minutes stretched, a growing feeling of unease crept into my chest. The woods felt different here, as if I had crossed into a part of the forest no one went into. The ground beneath my boots was soft and damp, the moss thicker and slick with moisture. My legs began to ache more than they should after just a few hours. Suddenly, I caught movement out of the corner of my eye. A flash of something pale, maybe a branch or a rock, but it moved again. I stopped and scanned the area, heart pounding. I couldn't see anything clearly. I thought it might be a deer or some other animal. But then I realized the tracks on the ground were no longer human shoe prints. They looked more like paw prints, large and deep, and they seemed to follow the same direction I was heading. The air smelled different now. A strong, sharp scent, like ammonia or something chemical, faint but unmistakable. I swallowed hard and pressed forward, wanting to get out of there. The trail became almost non-existent. I had to force my way through thick bushes that scratched my arms and legs. My jacket was torn in several places. After what felt like an hour, I finally saw a break in the trees, a small clearing. Relief flooded me. I stumbled forward, out of breath. The clearing wasn't large, maybe 20 feet across. In the center was a shallow depression filled with water, still and dark. What caught my eye was the strange arrangement of stones around it, placed in a rough circle. The stones looked old, covered in moss and dirt. I knelt down and touched one. It was cool and smooth. For a moment, I thought I had stumbled onto some kind of ancient marker or forgotten campsite. Then I noticed something else. The ground near the water was disturbed, like something large had been digging there recently. The earth was turned over in clumps, fresh and wet. Nearby, I saw what looked like scraps of fabric caught in the bushes. My heart skipped a beat. I scanned the area carefully and found other signs. Broken branches, flattened grass, deep claw marks on a nearby tree trunk. I realized I was not alone in this part of the forest. Something large and wild was here, something dangerous. I thought about turning back the way I came, but retracing my steps was nearly impossible. The thick underbrush had erased much of my trail, and I had no idea if the creature I sensed was still nearby. I forced myself to move, staying low and quiet. Every sound was amplified. The snap of a twig underfoot, the rustle of leaves in the breeze. I kept my eyes on the ground to avoid tripping, but I constantly glanced over my shoulder. The forest felt alive with unseen eyes watching me. Suddenly, a low growl echoed through the trees. It was close, maybe 50 feet away, and it was unmistakably the sound of a large predator. My breath caught. I froze for a moment, then quietly moved to a thick tree trunk. I pressed my back against the bark, trying to slow my heartbeat. I thought about the wildlife I knew in the area. Coyotes? Bears? Mountain lions? The growl sounded deeper than a coyote's howl and too close to ignore. I remembered reading about a recent sighting of a mountain lion in this region. Maybe that was what I was dealing with. The growl came again, louder this time, and I could hear movement. Heavy steps on the forest floor, the sound of something large pushing through bushes. I knew I had to get out of there fast. Carefully, I retraced my steps the way I thought I came. The forest seemed to close in around me, but I kept moving, faster now, almost running. Every muscle in my body ached, but I didn't dare stop. After what felt like an eternity, I finally saw a familiar landmark, a large fallen tree that had been near the trailhead. Relief flooded me. I pushed forward, breaking through the last thicket of bushes, and then there it was, the wide dirt path I had started on that morning. I didn't look back. I kept running down the trail until I reached my car. Hands shaking, heart pounding, I locked the doors and started the engine. The forest behind me looked calm from the safety of the road, but I knew what had been out there. I never went back to that trail. I told myself it was just an animal, part of nature. But the memory stayed with me. The silence, the growl, the feeling of being hunted. It was a reminder that even in places marked safe, the wild is still wild, and sometimes it doesn't want to be disturbed. The sun was just starting to rise when I parked my old truck at the trailhead. The air was cold and sharp, biting at my face like a warning. I'd been looking forward to this hike for weeks. A chance to get away from everything and be alone with the forest. The trail I picked was supposed to be quiet, not popular. I needed that. No distractions, no noise, just me and the woods. I slung my pack over my shoulder and started walking. The trail was narrow and rocky, winding through tall pine trees that blocked most of the morning light. The ground was damp from last night's rain. I could hear the soft crunch of my boots against wet leaves and broken twigs. I felt good, the way I always do when I'm deep in nature, far from the city's chaos. As I moved deeper, the forest grew thicker. The pines gave way to a mix of oaks and maples, their leaves turning colors, orange, red, yellow, signs of early autumn. The trail became steeper, winding up a hillside. My legs burned a little, but I kept steady. The fresh air filled my lungs. I looked around and noticed how quiet it had become. No birds singing, no rustling animals. Just the wind moving the branches above. I reached a small clearing near the top of the hill and stopped to catch my breath. From here, I could see a patchwork of forest stretching out below me, a sea of colors glowing softly in the early light. I took out my water bottle and drank slowly, enjoying the calm. After a while, I decided to push on. The trail continued along a ridge, twisting between rocky outcrops. I had to be careful with each step. The ground was uneven, and loose stones threatened to slide beneath my boots. My pack felt heavier now, sweat dripping down my back. About an hour later, I reached a fork in the trail. One path led down into a valley, the other climbed higher toward a rocky peak. I had planned to reach the peak and then head back, so I took the upward path. The air grew colder, and the trees thinned out. Soon, I was walking among jagged rocks, the wind cutting sharply across the ridge. The sun was higher now, bright but weak behind a layer of thin clouds. I kept moving, eyes scanning the rocks for safe footing. Then, just as I reached the summit, I noticed something strange. A faint scent, like smoke, hung in the air. Not fresh fire smoke, but old, dry, and lingering. I looked around but saw nothing. No campfires, no charred wood. That's when I spotted the footprints. At first, they seemed normal boots, maybe a couple of days old, pressed into the soft soil near a pile of rocks. But the way they moved disturbed me. They led off the main trail, toward a narrow crevice in the rock face that I hadn't noticed before. It looked like a small cave entrance, just wide enough for a person to squeeze through. I hesitated. The last thing I wanted was to explore unknown caves alone, but curiosity got the better of me. I dropped my pack and took out my flashlight. The beam cut into the darkness, showing rough stone walls and a floor littered with broken branches and dirt. I moved inside slowly, careful not to slip on loose stones. The air was colder here, heavier, and smelled musty. My footsteps echoed faintly as I went deeper. After about 15 feet, the tunnel opened into a wider chamber. I shone my light all around but saw only empty rock and dirt. Then I noticed it. Scattered on the ground were scraps of torn fabric, old and faded. Nearby lay a half-buried backpack, soaked with mud. My heart started to beat faster. These weren't random pieces of trash. They were signs someone had been here recently. Or maybe not so recently, but definitely human. I crouched and picked up a small, battered notebook. The cover was wet and torn, the pages inside smudged with dirt. I flipped through it carefully. Most of the pages were blank, but near the end, I found scrawled writing, messy and hurried. It wasn't a diary or a story. It was a list of dates and locations, some names, and then a few notes about supplies, food, and directions. The last entry was only a few weeks old. That's when I heard it. A faint noise from deeper inside the cave. First, I thought it was my imagination. Maybe the wind or a small animal moving around. But then it came again. A scraping, low and slow, like something or someone dragging a heavy object. I stood up quickly, feeling cold sweat on my forehead. My instincts screamed at me to leave. I grabbed my pack and turned back toward the entrance. The air felt thicker, heavier with every step. Just as I reached the mouth of the cave, the scraping noise came closer, louder, followed by a low, sharp grunt. I didn't stop to think anymore. I sprinted down the rocky ridge, heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. Back on the trail, I didn't look back. The sun was still high, but the peaceful forest felt different now, like it was hiding something I didn't want to know. My legs burned as I pushed down the slope, skipping rocks and dodging branches, desperate to get back to my truck. When I finally burst out of the trees onto the main trail, I pulled out my phone. No signal, of course. I cursed silently, then started walking faster, hoping to reach the trailhead before dark. It was late afternoon by the time I saw the parking lot, the empty space where I'd left my truck. Relief flooded through me as I jogged toward it. But then I stopped cold. There were footprints around my truck, wet, muddy, fresh, bigger than mine, heavier, and they circled the vehicle like someone had been watching. The driver's side door was slightly ajar. I didn't hesitate this time. I jumped inside, locked the doors, and started the engine. The truck roared to life, and I peeled out of the parking lot, heart hammering in my chest. As I drove down the winding road, I kept glancing in the rearview mirror. The forest loomed behind me, dark and silent. I knew I wasn't the first person to go looking for something in those woods. I wasn't the last either, but whatever or whoever had been in that cave was still out there. I didn't stop until I reached the nearest town, found a phone with a signal, and called the local ranger station. I told them what I'd found. The cave, the footprints, the strange noises. They said they'd send a team out to check. I didn't go back. I didn't want to know what was really living in those woods. But every time I close my eyes, I see the dark tunnel, feel the cold air, hear the scraping sound, and remember the heavy footsteps circling my truck. I went hiking to find peace. Instead, I found something I wasn't meant to see, and that was the last time I went alone into the forest. I set out early that morning, the air crisp and the sky a pale blue with just a few wisps of cloud. I had planned this solo hike for weeks, wanted to get away from the noise of the city, the screens, the constant rush. The trail I chose was in a national forest not far from where I live, a place people said was beautiful but quiet, off the usual beaten path. I wasn't expecting anything more than a good day in the woods, maybe some wildlife, and the peace I'd been craving. The trail started easy enough. It was wide and soft with pine needles, shaded by tall trees that swayed gently in the breeze. The smell of damp earth and fresh pine filled the air, and the sounds were mostly birds and the crunch of my boots on the ground. I carried a small backpack with water, snacks, a map, a compass, and a basic first aid kit. I didn't bring a phone, wanted to disconnect completely. As I walked deeper into the forest, the trees grew thicker and the path narrower. The sun filtered through the leaves in patches, casting long shadows that moved as the branches shifted. The air grew cooler and damper. Every so often, I'd stop and listen, trying to catch sounds. Anything that wasn't the usual forest noise. I thought I heard a twig snap somewhere off to the left, but saw nothing when I looked. Probably just a squirrel or a bird. About 3 hours in, I reached a small clearing by a creek. The water was clear and cold, running over smooth stones. I sat on a fallen log to rest and ate some trail mix, taking in the quiet. From here, the map showed the trail would start to climb uphill through denser forest before opening out onto a ridge with a good view. I packed up and headed on. The climb was steep and rough. Roots and rocks made footing tricky, and I had to stop a few times to catch my breath. But the view promised to be worth it. As I neared the ridge, I noticed something odd. A faint trail branching off from the main path. It looked less traveled, almost overgrown. I didn't see it marked on my map, but curiosity pulled me toward it. It wasn't far from the ridge, maybe just a short detour. The smaller trail was narrower, with bushes brushing against my legs and branches scraping my arms. It twisted through thick undergrowth, and the canopy closed overhead, making it darker. I kept moving forward, partly because the forest was beautiful in its own way and partly because I wanted to know where this hidden path led. After about 20 minutes, I came to a fallen tree blocking the trail. It was massive, uprooted long ago, and covered in moss. I scrambled over it, careful not to slip. Beyond the tree, the ground sloped steeply down toward a ravine. From here, I could hear the sound of water again, but it was deeper and louder, like a small waterfall or rapid stream. I decided to follow the slope down carefully, hoping to find the water and maybe a good spot to rest. The earth was loose in places, and I had to test each step before putting my weight down. The sound of the water grew louder, and soon I saw a narrow stream rushing between rocks at the bottom of the ravine. It wasn't marked on the map either. The place felt remote, so much so that the usual forest sounds seemed muted. I sat on a rock near the edge of the stream and took a long drink from my bottle. Then I looked around, trying to take in everything. The trees were dense here, mostly firs and pines, with thick bushes growing along the banks. There were no paths, no signs of people, just the wild forest. That's when I first noticed something out of place. On the opposite bank, partially hidden by bushes, was a small campsite. Nothing fancy, just a worn tarp tied between two trees, some empty cans scattered nearby, and a rough fire pit. The ashes were old, but some blackened sticks lay on top as if the fire was recently put out. No tent, no sleeping bag, no gear that looked complete. Just the tarp and those few items. I didn't like it. Felt wrong somehow. This wasn't a spot people should camp. It was too hidden, almost secret. I felt a chill creep up my neck and tried to ignore it, telling myself people often leave trash or stop briefly in places like this. I stood up to head back to the main trail, but the ground beneath me was slick with wet leaves. My foot slipped and I nearly fell into the stream. I caught myself just in time, heart pounding. I glanced back at the camp once more before moving. That's when I saw the footprints. They were faint in the soft mud near the fire pit, but they were fresh. I could tell by the way the mud clung to the edges and the slight indentations in the soft earth. They were large, too large for my boots, and they weren't from one person. Several sets, overlapping, heading deeper into the forest on the far side of the stream. My skin prickled. I didn't know who they belonged to, but whoever it was had been here recently and was still nearby. I decided I needed to get back to the main trail quickly and finish the hike before it got dark. I crossed the stream carefully at a shallow spot, stepping on rocks to keep dry, and found the overgrown trail again. I moved faster now, trying to keep calm, but every crack of a twig or rustle of leaves made me tense. When I finally got back to the ridge, the sun was lower, casting longer shadows across the valley. I stopped to catch my breath and check my bearings. I was off the main path by nearly half an hour, but I still had time to reach the trailhead before dark if I hurried. That's when I noticed something else. On the ridge, carved into the bark of a tree, were rough initials and numbers. They looked fresh, the cuts sharp and bleeding sap. It was like someone had marked a code or a sign. I felt sick. It was clear now that someone had been watching the trail, maybe tracking it or worse. That small campsite was not just a forgotten stop. It was a base. Someone had been hiding out here, close enough to watch anyone hiking through. I didn't wait to think more. I started down the trail at a run, heart pounding with a mix of fear and adrenaline. The forest grew darker as the sun sank behind the hills, and the path became harder to follow in the low light. I stumbled over roots and rocks but didn't stop. The sounds of the forest changed too. More silence now, like everything was holding its breath. Finally, I reached the last stretch near the parking lot, where the trees opened to familiar gravel and the distant hum of cars. I didn't slow until I was out in the open, the sun gone behind the hills. I looked back once more into the forest. The quiet there felt heavier now, loaded with the unknown. I made it to my car with minutes to spare. I locked the doors and sat inside, heart still racing. I didn't call anyone or stay. I drove straight home, taking the safest roads and not stopping until I was inside my apartment with the door locked tight behind me. Later, I reported what I saw to the park rangers. They told me the area had been known for occasional squatters and trespassers who sometimes stayed hidden in the woods, but they hadn't had a serious incident in years. They said they'd increase patrols and look into it. I never went back to that trail. I stopped hiking alone. That day taught me how easily the forest can hide people. Not just animals or nature, but others too. And sometimes the scariest thing isn't a ghost or a monster, but knowing someone could be watching, waiting, right out there in the trees where you think you're alone. I decided to go hiking alone that weekend, just me and the woods. The trail I picked was supposed to be quiet, not very popular, deep inside the forest. I liked the idea. No crowds, no noise, just nature and my own thoughts. The weather was good, a little cool with a soft breeze, and the sky was clear. I packed my backpack with the basics: water, some snacks, a first aid kit, and a small flashlight, even though I didn't expect to be out after dark. The path started easy enough. A dirt trail lined with tall trees whose leaves were just beginning to change color with the season. The air smelled fresh, like pine and wet earth. I could hear birds somewhere up high and the occasional rustle of small animals in the bushes. At first, everything felt calm, peaceful even. But as I walked deeper, the forest seemed to close in around me. The trees grew thicker, taller, and their branches formed a kind of dark roof above the trail. Shadows stretched long on the ground, even though it was still early afternoon. I kept going, focused on the crunch of my boots on the dry leaves. After about 2 hours, the trail began to slope down into a small valley. The valley was narrow, with steep sides covered in thick underbrush. The ground here was softer, damp, and the air was cooler. I noticed a thin mist starting to rise from the soil. It wasn't fog exactly, just a thin, white haze clinging to the ground. I didn't think much of it, but something about it made the place feel colder, even though the sun was still out. I stopped for a minute to drink some water and eat a granola bar. I looked around and saw no signs of other people. No footprints, no litter, nothing but the untouched forest. The silence was heavier here. It wasn't the peaceful silence of the first part of the hike. It was different, more like the forest was holding its breath. That feeling made me uneasy, but I told myself it was just the place, nothing more. I moved on, following the trail as it wound through the valley. Suddenly, I noticed something strange. The trail seemed less clear, almost like it hadn't been used for a long time. The dirt path was covered with leaves and broken branches, and the trees leaned closer over it. I didn't want to turn back yet, but I made sure to watch my step carefully. Then I heard it, a faint sound that didn't belong to the birds or the wind. It was a low, rustling noise, coming from the bushes just off the trail to my right. At first, I thought it might be a deer or some other small animal, but it was too loud and too close. I froze and listened hard, but the noise stopped. I waited a few seconds, then slowly turned my head to look. There was nothing there, just the dark green leaves shaking slightly in the breeze. I shook my head, telling myself I was imagining things, and kept moving. A little further, I noticed the trail splitting. There was no sign or marker, just two paths. One going uphill and one continuing straight ahead along the valley floor. I hesitated. The map I had didn't show this split clearly, but the uphill path looked less overgrown. I chose the uphill trail, thinking it might lead back out of the valley faster. The climb was harder than I expected. The ground was loose and covered in small rocks, making my footing tricky. I moved carefully, trying not to slip. As I got higher, the trees started to thin out, and I could see a part of the valley below me. The mist was still there, sitting like a white blanket on the ground. The sun was lower now, and long shadows stretched across the landscape. Suddenly, I heard the rustling again, this time from the path behind me. I stopped and looked back but saw nothing. The bushes didn't move and no animal appeared. My heart started beating faster. I told myself again it was nothing, probably just the wind. But the feeling of being watched was growing stronger. I kept climbing, but the noise didn't stop. Every few minutes, the rustling came again, always from somewhere just behind me or off to the side. I slowed down, trying to listen carefully. Then, I heard a different sound. A crunching noise, like someone stepping on dry leaves. This time, it wasn't soft or quick like a small animal. It was heavy and slow, deliberate. I stopped completely, my breath coming fast now. I looked over my shoulder, trying to catch a glimpse of whatever was there. The forest around me was thick, but I could see a small space between the trees. There was nothing in the open, but the sounds kept coming from deeper in the shadows. I didn't see any movement, but I knew I wasn't alone. I felt a sudden rush of panic. I wanted to run, but I also knew running uphill on loose rocks was dangerous. So I kept walking, faster now, glancing back every few seconds. The rustling and crunching stayed close, never too far away. It was like something was following me, but staying just out of sight. After what felt like an hour, but was probably only 20 minutes, I reached the top of the hill. There was a narrow ridge, and the trail opened out to a small clearing. The trees were sparse here, and I could see the sun setting in the distance. The sky was a dark orange, fading to purple. I stopped to catch my breath and looked around. The noise was gone. No rustling, no crunching, only the sound of the wind moving through the grass. I felt relief wash over me, but also confusion. I didn't understand what had been following me, or why it had stopped. I took out my phone to check the time and my location. The battery was low, but I managed to get a signal and sent a quick message to a friend, telling them where I was. I decided to stay in the clearing until it got lighter or someone came for me. The idea of going back down the hill in the dark was too dangerous. As the last light faded, the forest became quiet again. The shadows deepened, and the temperature dropped sharply. I wrapped myself in my jacket and sat down on a rock, trying to stay calm. I didn't hear any sounds after that, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been close to me, something that didn't belong there. The next morning, I found the trail back down without trouble. When I got to my car, I looked around the area again. Near the valley floor, I found strange tracks in the dirt, large footprints, uneven and heavy. They were not from any animal I knew, and they seemed to follow the trail I had taken. They stopped at the edge of the trees near the valley and didn't continue. I reported what I saw to the park rangers. They told me the area had been known for illegal hunters and poachers who sometimes used the forest for their own purposes. It made sense, the noises, the feeling of being followed, the tracks. It wasn't a ghost or a fairy tale, but something much more real and dangerous. That day taught me something important about the woods. Nature can be beautiful and peaceful, but it can also hide things that are hard to see and even harder to understand. I was lucky to get out safe. Now, whenever I go hiking, I pay more attention to the signs around me and never ignore that feeling when something doesn't feel right. The forest isn't just trees and animals. It's a place where people sometimes hide, and not all of them mean well. That's the real fear, the kind you can't just walk away from without looking over your shoulder. The morning air was crisp and cool when I set out for the trail. It was early spring, and the forest was still waking up from the long winter. The ground was soft and damp, covered with patches of melting snow and new green shoots pushing through the earth. I was alone, as usual, with my backpack, water bottle, and a basic map of the area. The plan was to spend the day hiking a remote trail that wound through thick woods, rocky hills, and a small ridge overlooking a river valley. I had been on similar hikes before, but this one felt different, somehow quieter and more isolated. The first few hours were easy, following the narrow path as it twisted between tall pine and oak trees. The sunlight filtered through the branches, casting dappled shadows on the ground. Birds chirped here and there, and the occasional rustle of small animals moving through the underbrush reminded me I wasn't completely alone. I kept a steady pace, enjoying the steady rhythm of my footsteps and the fresh smell of pine and wet earth. About halfway through, the trail began to climb steeply. The trees grew closer together, and the forest floor was littered with rocks and fallen branches. I had to slow down, watching each step carefully to avoid slipping. My legs started to ache, but I pushed on. The air was cooler up here, and I could hear the distant rush of the river below, hidden by the dense foliage. As I rounded a bend, I noticed something strange. The path ahead looked different. The dirt was freshly disturbed, and there were broken twigs and flattened grass on both sides, as if something had passed through recently. At first, I thought it might be a deer or some other animal, but the marks looked too big and scattered, like something larger had moved through. My skin prickled. I scanned the trees, but saw nothing. I kept going, trying to ignore the feeling that I was being watched. I told myself it was just the forest, nothing more. But then I heard it. A low snapping sound from somewhere off the trail, like a branch breaking under weight. I froze, heart pounding. The noise didn't sound like an animal. It was heavier, deliberate. I waited, holding my breath, but there was only silence after that. I decided to keep moving, faster now, eyes sharp. The trail twisted again, and I reached a clearing where the trees opened up to reveal a steep drop down to the river. I paused to catch my breath and take in the view. The water was far below, rushing white and loud, cutting through the rocky valley. The wind picked up, carrying a chill that made me zip my jacket tighter. From the edge of the clearing, the trail continued on, narrower and less worn. It led into a thicker part of the forest. I hesitated. The feeling of unease was growing stronger. The forest seemed darker here, even with the sun still high. The trees were older, their trunks wide and twisted, branches tangled together like a wall. I took a deep breath and stepped forward. The trail was hard to follow. The dirt was covered in fallen leaves, and the path disappeared in places. My boots made soft crunching sounds with every step. Suddenly, the hair on the back of my neck stood up again. There was a faint smell, something sharp and metallic. It was faint, but I could tell it wasn't natural. Like blood. I stopped and looked around carefully. Nothing was in sight. No animals, no people. Just the dense forest pressing in from all sides. The silence was heavy. No birds, no rustling leaves, no wind. Just the distant roar of the river. Then I saw it. On the ground, half hidden under some leaves, was a small piece of torn fabric. It looked like part of a jacket or shirt, dark and stained. I crouched down to examine it. The fabric was stiff, rough, soaked with something dark. I touched it briefly and pulled my hand back quickly. It smelled metallic and sharp. Blood. My stomach turned. I wasn't alone here, and whoever or whatever had been through this clearing hadn't left by accident. I tried to think clearly. I had a phone, but there was no signal out here. I was far from any road or help. I decided to turn back, but as I started retracing my steps, I heard it again. This time, a clear, heavy footstep on the leaves behind me. Not a deer or small animal. Something big, heavy, and slow. I stopped and waited. The footstep came again, closer this time, followed by another. They didn't sound like someone walking normally, more like someone dragging something. My heart hammered so loud I was sure it echoed through the forest. I looked around desperately, searching for any sign of movement, but all I saw were trees, standing still and silent. I picked up my pace, trying to stay calm, but the steps followed me, always just behind, never speeding up, never slowing down. I didn't dare look back. I didn't want to see what was behind me. The path grew steeper and more uneven as I hurried downhill, muscles burning, lungs gasping for air. My mind raced with possibilities. Maybe it was a hunter, someone hurt or dangerous, or worse, someone who didn't want to be found. Finally, I broke through the thick trees and saw the trailhead ahead, where my car was parked. Relief flooded me, but I kept moving, not stopping until I reached the clearing with the parking lot. I glanced around quickly. No one. No footsteps or signs of anyone else. I jumped into my car and locked the doors. The engine roared to life, and I didn't waste a second before speeding away down the narrow dirt road. The forest faded behind me, but the feeling of eyes watching never left. Later, when I got home, I told a ranger about the fabric and the footsteps on the trail. They said sometimes people get lost or hurt out there, and not all stories get told. The blood and fabric might have been from someone in trouble, but no one had reported a missing person in that area recently. I thought about calling the police, but there was no proof, only a vague feeling and that small piece of fabric. I still hike sometimes, but I never went back to that trail. The memory of those heavy footsteps behind me, the smell of blood, and the silence that swallowed the forest kept me away. It was real and it was dangerous. Not some story of ghosts or monsters, but a raw, cold reminder that out there, in the quiet wilderness, something bad happened, and maybe it's still waiting, just beyond the trees. I had been planning this hike for weeks. I wanted to get away from the city noise, the constant buzz of people and cars, and just be alone with the woods. I picked a trail deep in the mountains, one that was less popular so I wouldn't run into many people. The kind of trail where you could feel completely isolated. I packed my backpack carefully. Water, food, a first aid kit, a map, compass, and my phone, though I knew it probably wouldn't have service out there. The morning was clear and cold when I started walking, the air crisp with the smell of pine and wet earth. The path was rough but well-marked. Trees towered on either side, their trunks thick and rough, their branches forming a thick green ceiling over the trail. The sun filtered through the leaves and patches, casting a soft glow on the ground. The only sounds were my footsteps crunching over leaves and twigs, the occasional chirp of birds, and the distant rustle of small animals in the underbrush. The first few hours were peaceful, almost calming. I stopped a few times to take pictures of interesting plants or rocks and drank water from my bottle to stay hydrated. About 4 hours in, I reached a small clearing next to a stream. The water was crystal clear, tumbling over smooth stones and making a soft, babbling sound. I sat down on a rock, took out a granola bar, and rested. The forest here was dense and dark around the edges of the clearing, and the sunlight didn't reach very far into the trees. I felt good, almost proud of myself for making it this far without any trouble. After resting for about 20 minutes, I packed up and continued. The trail started to climb steadily, winding up through tighter woods. The air was cooler here, the trees thicker, and the sounds of wildlife more frequent. It felt less like a peaceful walk now and more like a real trek through the wild. The sun was high, but the thick branches overhead meant only small shafts of light hit the ground. I kept going, but after another hour, something started to feel wrong. I noticed the trail wasn't as clear as before. The markers I had been following were harder to spot. The path was narrower and covered with more fallen branches and leaves, as if fewer people passed here. I paused and pulled out my map. I compared it with the landscape around me and the compass. According to both, I was still on the right path, but I couldn't shake the feeling I was being watched. Every so often, I caught movement out of the corner of my eye, a branch snapping, a shadow flickering between the trees, but when I looked directly, nothing was there. I decided to keep moving, my steps quicker now, but still careful. I reminded myself that it was probably just animals or the wind playing tricks on me. Still, the silence grew heavier, and the forest seemed to close in tighter around me. The trees were older here, their bark rough and twisted, covered with moss and fungus. The ground was damp and muddy, and my boots made sucking noises as I walked. I was getting tired, and my legs ached from the steady climb. Suddenly, I stumbled on something, an old, rusty piece of metal half buried in the dirt. I bent down to see what it was and realized it was part of a broken signpost. The wood was cracked and rotting, the paint long faded. It looked like someone had left this trail or that the trail had once been marked better but had been abandoned for years. That explained the fading markers and why the path was so rough now. The realization made me uneasy. I wasn't just alone. I might be somewhere that people rarely came anymore. I looked around carefully. The trees seemed even darker, the shadows longer. I could hear something else now, a faint crunching sound behind me. I turned quickly but saw only more trees and underbrush. I decided to keep moving forward, faster now, hoping to reach a safer, clearer part of the trail soon. Then the crunching came again, louder and closer. I stopped dead, heart pounding. I froze and listened. The sound moved with me, following the same path, never getting too close, but never going away either. I couldn't see anyone or anything, just trees and bushes. My mind raced with possibilities, maybe another hiker or a hunter or even a wild animal. But why was whoever or whatever it was keeping distance but still following? I started to walk again, not looking back, trying to keep calm. My breathing was heavy, and every crack of a twig made me jump. The trail became steeper and rockier now. I was sweating even though the air was cool. I focused on the path, putting one foot in front of the other. But I didn't want to lose my bearings. I stopped again and checked my compass and map. I was heading in the right direction, but it felt like the forest was pushing me off course. I pushed through thick bushes, branches scratching my arms, my shirt sticking to my back with sweat. The sound behind me was still there, steady, but always just out of sight. I felt exposed, vulnerable, like I was being hunted. I was gripping my backpack straps tightly, ready to run or fight if I needed to. I tried to think logically. Maybe it was just a wild animal curious or a person who didn't want to show themselves. But the silence and the unseen presence made it worse than any clear danger. As the sun began to lower in the sky, casting long shadows and cooling the air further, I knew I needed to find shelter soon. I could see a rocky ridge ahead, the end of the climb before the trail flattened out. Maybe there would be a place to rest there. My legs felt like lead, but I pushed on. The crunching behind me suddenly stopped. The silence was louder than ever, almost painful. I glanced back quickly but saw nothing. Reaching the ridge, I found a large flat rock and sat down, trying to catch my breath and calm my nerves. I took out my water bottle and drank slowly. I kept looking around, but there was no sign of anyone or anything else. The forest was quiet except for the wind in the branches. After a while, I realized I had to make a decision. I could try to continue the trail, but it was getting darker, and I wasn't sure I could find my way safely. Or I could try to head back the way I came. I decided that it was safer to go back. Even if something was following me, at least I knew the path behind me better than the one ahead. I stood up, adjusted my pack, and started walking back down the trail. My pace was steady but cautious. First, there was no sound behind me. I allowed myself to relax a little. Then, after about 10 minutes, I heard it again. The crunching footsteps, following at the same distance as before. This time, I didn't look back. I kept walking fast, trying not to panic. After what felt like an eternity, I saw the clearing near the stream again. Relief washed over me like a wave. I hurried through the trees and reached the stream's edge, where I had rested earlier. The open space made me feel safer. I stopped and looked around carefully, but there was no one. I stayed there for a while, letting my heart slow down, watching the water flow over the stones. I decided to call for help, even though I knew the phone might not work. I pulled it out, and to my surprise, I got a weak signal. I quickly dialed 911 and explained my location as best as I could. They told me a ranger would be sent out to find me. I stayed put by the stream, waiting. The sun was almost gone now, and the forest was growing dark. After about 30 minutes, I heard voices and footsteps coming down the trail. A ranger appeared, flashlight cutting through the darkness. He looked serious and asked me if I was okay. I told him what happened, about the footsteps, about feeling followed. The ranger nodded and told me the area was known for people getting lost or even stalked by hunters or poachers illegally in the forest. He said he would take me back to the trailhead. As we walked out together, I felt safe for the first time since the footsteps began. The woods behind me felt less like a place to hide something dangerous and more like a reminder that even in the quietest places, people's presence can make the wild feel unsafe. Back at my car, I packed up quickly. I didn't want to stay another minute. The hike that started with peaceful quiet had turned into something that felt real and dangerous. I learned that being alone in the wild isn't just about nature. It's about being prepared for the unexpected. Not just animals or weather, but people too. And sometimes, the scariest part isn't what you see, but what you can only hear and never fully understand. I set out early in the morning on a clear, cool day, my backpack heavy with supplies, my boots laced tight. The trail I chose was a random path I found on an old map, one that wasn't heavily traveled or well-marked. I liked the idea of hiking somewhere unknown, alone, without the noise of other people. The forest was dense, with tall trees standing close, their branches tangled like a thick web above me. The air smelled fresh but damp, with a faint scent of pine and wet earth. The ground beneath my feet was soft, covered in fallen leaves and broken twigs that snapped quietly with each step. The first few hours passed without incident. I moved steadily, careful with each step on the uneven trail, watching the light shift through the canopy. Occasionally, I paused to drink water or adjust my pack. Birds chirped in the distance, and the wind rustled leaves overhead, but otherwise, the forest was quiet. I felt calm, maybe even a little proud of choosing such a remote place for my hike. After about 4 hours, the trail started to change. It narrowed and became less clear, the underbrush thicker, and the trees seemed older, their trunks twisted and gnarled. The sunlight barely touched the ground here, and the forest felt colder, darker somehow. My boots slipped occasionally on the moss-covered stones hidden beneath the leaves. I kept moving forward, telling myself this was part of the adventure. I had a map and a compass. I was prepared. Then I noticed something strange. The trail markers, small painted blazes on the trees, had stopped. I checked my map carefully. According to it, the trail should have continued straight, but here the path was lost. I looked around, trying to find any sign of the trail, but there was nothing, just trees and thick bushes all around. My heart started to beat a little faster. I took a deep breath and tried to stay calm. I decided to backtrack to the last marker I remembered. I turned and walked carefully, trying not to rush and make mistakes. The forest seemed to close in on me. Shadows stretched longer as the afternoon sun began to lower. The wind picked up, making the branches above creak and sway. I felt a tight knot in my stomach, the kind of nervous feeling that's hard to shake. After a few minutes, I thought I heard something. A soft crunching sound behind me, like footsteps on dry leaves. I stopped and listened, but the forest was silent again. I told myself it was probably an animal or just the wind moving branches. Still, I didn't want to take any chances. I picked up my pace, moving quicker but still careful. The path was uneven, and the thick roots were a tripping hazard. Suddenly, I stumbled over a root and fell forward hard. My hands scraped against rough bark, and a sharp pain shot through my wrist. I sat up slowly, testing the pain. It wasn't broken, but it was sore and bleeding a little. I wiped the dirt from my hands and stood up, my heart still racing from the fall and the growing unease in my chest. I looked around and realized something worse. I had lost my compass in the fall. I patted my pockets and my backpack frantically but couldn't find it. Without the compass, my chances of finding my way back were getting worse by the minute. The sun was sinking fast now, casting long shadows that made the forest look even more menacing. I tried to calm down and think clearly. I checked the map again. There was a small river marked a short distance from where I was. If I could find it, I might follow it downstream to a road or some kind of civilization. The thought gave me a little hope. I pushed through thick bushes and tangled branches, my hands scraping against the rough bark. Every now and then, I stopped and listened. The forest was alive with sounds. Birds calling, leaves rustling, the distant sound of running water. But it also felt empty, and the deeper I went, the heavier the silence between the sounds became. I knew the sun would be gone soon, and I had to find shelter before dark. After what felt like an hour but could have been much longer, I heard the water. It was faint, but definitely the sound of a flowing stream. I moved toward it carefully, the ground sloping downward. The undergrowth gave way to smoother rocks and wet earth. When I reached the river, I felt a mix of relief and new worry. The river was narrow but fast-moving, the water cold and clear. The banks were steep in places, and the trees grew close to the edge, blocking any clear view ahead. I decided to follow the river downstream, hoping it would lead me somewhere safe. My wrist throbbed with pain, but I forced myself to keep moving. The path along the river wasn't easy. It was slippery and uneven, and I had to watch every step to avoid falling again. The light was almost gone, and the forest was changing as night approached. Shadows thickened, and the sounds of animals shifted. Somewhere in the distance, I thought I heard a low growl or snarl, but I couldn't be sure. I stopped for a moment and looked around. The forest was dense, dark, and unfamiliar. My throat felt dry, and I was tired beyond belief. I realized I hadn't eaten much that day, just a few bites of a granola bar. The quiet was overwhelming, and I felt small and exposed. I kept moving, the river always to my right. After some time, I saw a faint light flickering through the trees on the other side of the river. At first, I thought it was a campfire or someone else's flashlight. Hope surged inside me, but as I got closer, I realized it wasn't a fire. It was the reflection of the moon on the water, shining brightly between the dark trees. No other lights, no signs of people. The night grew colder. I knew I couldn't keep walking much longer. I found a small clearing close to the riverbank where the ground was flat and clear of thick brush. I set down my pack and took out my emergency blanket, wrapping it around myself as best I could. My wrist hurt more now, and my legs ached with exhaustion. The forest around me was quiet again, but not peaceful. There was a weight in the air, a sense of danger just beyond sight. I stayed awake as long as I could, listening to every sound. The rustling of leaves, the distant splash of the river, the occasional call of an animal. I didn't sleep well, jumping at every noise. But morning finally came, pale and cold. I took a deep breath, feeling the stiff ache in my body and the dull pain in my wrist. The sun was low, but the light made everything look less frightening. I followed the river again, slower this time, careful not to fall or injure myself more. After several hours, I finally heard the sound of a road, cars, distant voices, signs of people. I pushed through the last trees and found a small rural road, just as the map had suggested. I flagged down a passing car, my clothes torn, my face scratched and dirty, but alive. They called for help, and soon I was safe, wrapped in a blanket, talking to a rescue team. The forest behind me looked calm and quiet in the daylight, but I knew how close I had come to being lost for good. I never took a random, unmarked trail again. The experience stayed with me. The cold fear of the unknown, the sharp reminder that nature isn't just beautiful, but wild and dangerous. You have to respect it, prepare for it, and never underestimate how quickly things can go wrong when you're alone out there. I set out early that morning, the air crisp and the sky a pale blue with just a few wisps of cloud. I had planned this solo hike for weeks, wanted to get away from the noise of the city, the screens, the constant rush. The trail I chose was in a national forest not far from where I live, a place people said was beautiful but quiet, off the usual beaten path. I wasn't expecting anything more than a good day in the woods, maybe some wildlife, and the peace I'd been craving. The trail started easy enough. It was wide and soft with pine needles, shaded by tall trees that swayed gently in the breeze. The smell of damp earth and fresh pine filled the air, and the sounds were mostly birds and the crunch of my boots on the ground. I carried a small backpack with water, snacks, a map, a compass, and a basic first aid kit. I didn't bring a phone, wanted to disconnect completely. As I walked deeper into the forest, the trees grew thicker and the path narrower. The sun filtered through the leaves and patches, casting long shadows that moved as the branches shifted. The air grew cooler and damper. Every so often, I'd stop and listen, trying to catch sounds. Anything that wasn't the usual forest noise. I thought I heard a twig snap somewhere off to the left, but saw nothing when I looked. Probably just a squirrel or a bird. About 3 hours in, I reached a small clearing by a creek. The water was clear and cold, running over smooth stones. I sat on a fallen log to rest and ate some trail mix, taking in the quiet. From here, the map showed the trail would start to climb uphill through denser forest before opening out onto a ridge with a good view. I packed up and headed on. The climb was steep and rough. Roots and rocks made footing tricky, and I had to stop a few times to catch my breath. But the view promised to be worth it. As I neared the ridge, I noticed something odd. A faint trail branching off from the main path. It looked less traveled, almost overgrown. I didn't see it marked on my map, but curiosity pulled me toward it. It wasn't far from the ridge, maybe just a short detour. The smaller trail was narrower, with bushes brushing against my legs and branches scraping my arms. It twisted through thick undergrowth, and the canopy closed overhead, making it darker. I kept moving forward, partly because the forest was beautiful in its own way and partly because I wanted to know where this hidden path led. After about 20 minutes, I came to a fallen tree blocking the trail. It was massive, uprooted long ago, and covered in moss. I scrambled over it, careful not to slip. Beyond the tree, the ground sloped steeply down toward a ravine. From here, I could hear the sound of water again, but it was deeper and louder, like a small waterfall or rapid stream. I decided to follow the slope down carefully, hoping to find the water and maybe a good spot to rest. The earth was loose in places, and I had to test each step before putting my weight down. The sound of the water grew louder, and soon I saw a narrow stream rushing between rocks at the bottom of the ravine. It wasn't marked on the map either. The place felt remote, so much so that the usual forest sounds seemed muted. I sat on a rock near the edge of the stream and took a long drink from my bottle. Then I looked around, trying to take in everything. The trees were dense here, mostly firs and pines, with thick bushes growing along the banks. There were no paths, no signs of people, just the wild forest. That's when I first noticed something out of place. On the opposite bank, partially hidden by bushes, was a small campsite. Nothing fancy, just a worn tarp tied between two trees, some empty cans scattered nearby, and a rough fire pit. The ashes were old, but some blackened sticks lay on top as if the fire was recently put out. No tent, no sleeping bag, no gear that looked complete. Just the tarp and those few items. I didn't like it. Felt wrong somehow. This wasn't a spot people should camp. It was too hidden, almost secret. I felt a chill creep up my neck and tried to ignore it, telling myself people often leave trash or stop briefly in places like this. I stood up to head back to the main trail, but the ground beneath me was slick with wet leaves. My foot slipped and I nearly fell into the stream. I caught myself just in time, heart pounding. I glanced back at the camp once more before moving. That's when I saw the footprints. They were faint in the soft mud near the fire pit, but they were fresh. I could tell by the way the mud clung to the edges and the slight indentations in the soft earth. They were large, too large for my boots, and they weren't from one person. Several sets, overlapping, heading deeper into the forest on the far side of the stream. My skin prickled. I didn't know who they belonged to, but whoever it was had been here recently and was still nearby. I decided I needed to get back to the main trail quickly and finish the hike before it got dark. I crossed the stream carefully at a shallow spot, stepping on rocks to keep dry, and found the overgrown trail again. I moved faster now, trying to keep calm, but every crack of a twig or rustle of leaves made me tense. When I finally got back to the ridge, the sun was lower, casting longer shadows across the valley. I stopped to catch my breath and check my bearings. I was off the main path by nearly half an hour, but I still had time to reach the trailhead before dark if I hurried. That's when I noticed something else. On the ridge, carved into the bark of a tree, were rough initials and numbers. They looked fresh, the cuts sharp and bleeding sap. It was like someone had marked a code or a sign. I felt sick. It was clear now that someone had been watching the trail, maybe tracking it or worse. That small campsite was not just a forgotten stop. It was a base. Someone had been hiding out here, close enough to watch anyone hiking through. I didn't wait to think more. I started down the trail at a run, heart pounding with a mix of fear and adrenaline. The forest grew darker as the sun sank behind the hills, and the path became harder to follow in the low light. I stumbled over roots and rocks but didn't stop. The sounds of the forest changed too. More silence now, like everything was holding its breath. Finally, I reached the last stretch near the parking lot, where the trees opened to familiar gravel and the distant hum of cars. I didn't slow until I was out in the open, the sun gone behind the hills. I looked back once more into the forest. The quiet there felt heavier now, loaded with the unknown. I made it to my car with minutes to spare. I locked the doors and sat inside, heart still racing. I didn't call anyone or stay. I drove straight home, taking the safest roads and not stopping until I was inside my apartment with the door locked tight behind me. Later, I reported what I saw to the park rangers. They told me the area had been known for occasional squatters and trespassers who sometimes stayed hidden in the woods, but they hadn't had a serious incident in years. They said they'd increase patrols and look into it. I never went back to that trail. I stopped hiking alone. That day taught me how easily the forest can hide people. Not just animals or nature, but others too. And sometimes the scariest thing isn't a ghost or a monster, but knowing someone could be watching, waiting, right out there in the trees where you think you're alone. The morning was cold and clear when I started the hike. The trailhead was quiet, just me and the early sunlight filtering through the thick trees. The forest smelled fresh, with damp earth and pine needles all around. I had been looking forward to this trip for weeks. A chance to get away from the city noise and clear my head. The path was narrow and winding, covered in fallen leaves and small rocks, but it was easy enough to follow. I kept my pace steady, breathing in the cool air. Birds chirped overhead, and somewhere nearby a stream gurgled softly. I wasn't expecting anything unusual, just a simple day hike. My backpack was light, just some water, snacks, and a small first aid kit. I told myself I didn't need much more for a day in the woods. The sun was rising higher now, and I felt good, strong, ready for the day ahead. After a couple of hours, the trail began to climb steeply. The trees thinned out a bit, and I could see a ridge ahead. My legs burned a little from the incline, but I pushed on. At the top, the forest opened to a small clearing with a view of the valley below. I stopped to catch my breath and took a long drink of water. The wind was stronger here, cold and biting, and I pulled my jacket tighter around me. I sat on a fallen log, resting for a few minutes. The silence was deep except for the wind and distant bird calls. The kind of silence that feels heavy, like the forest is holding its breath. I looked around carefully, noticing the way the trees seemed to lean in, their branches tangled and thick. The ground was soft underfoot, covered with moss and dead leaves that muffled my steps. I didn't see any other hikers all day, which was unusual for a trail this popular. I assumed they had all turned back or chosen different routes. The thought was a little strange but not worrying. Sometimes people avoided this part because of the steep climbs. I told myself it was good to have the place almost to myself. I started down the other side of the ridge, the path becoming less clear. The trail was rougher here, stones loose underfoot and roots twisting across the ground. I had to watch every step to avoid slipping. As I descended, I noticed something odd. The marks on the trees, deep scratches, like something large had dragged claws along the bark. At first, I thought it was just a bear or a big animal, but the marks were too high off the ground and too wide apart for that. My heart started to beat a little faster. I scanned the trees around me. The woods were thick and shadowy now, the sun falling behind the mountains. The temperature dropped suddenly, making me pull my jacket tighter again. I kept moving, trying to stay calm. The trail twisted, and I realized I had lost sight of the stream I had followed earlier. I stopped to check my map and compass, but my hands were shaking slightly. Something wasn't right. The forest felt different, darker, more closed in. The wind had died down completely, leaving an eerie stillness. I listened carefully but heard nothing except my own breathing and the crunch of my boots on leaves. Then I saw it. Up ahead on a fallen tree, There was a small pile of broken branches and rocks arranged in a rough circle. It looked like someone had made a crude shelter or marker. I felt a chill run down my spine. Why would someone build that so far off the trail? And why did it look so fresh, like it had been made recently? I moved closer to look but stopped when I noticed the ground around it. There were footprints, too large to be mine and not matching any animal tracks I knew. The prints were deep, like something heavy had stepped there, and they led away from the pile, deeper into the forest, away from the path. I considered turning back, but the trail behind me was barely visible now, swallowed by underbrush and fallen branches. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. The sun was almost gone, and I was far from any clear route. I decided to follow the footprints for a little way, hoping they might lead me to someone or some sign of where I was. The forest closed around me tighter with every step. The trees grew denser, their branches blocking out the last light. The air was colder, heavy with the smell of wet earth and something else. A faint, sharp odor I couldn't place. I kept my eyes on the footprints, which sometimes vanished under leaves and reappeared on dirt patches. Suddenly, I heard a snapping sound behind me, like a branch breaking. I stopped and turned quickly, but there was nothing there. My heart hammered in my chest. I told myself it was just the wind or an animal, but my hands clenched into fists. I kept moving faster now. The footprints led to a steep drop-off covered with thick brush. I could see a small river far below, rushing and white with foam. The edge was unstable and crumbling, and I realized this was no place to keep going. I turned back toward the trail, hoping to retrace my steps, but the forest looked different, almost like it had shifted around me. The trail was gone. The trees and bushes blocked any clear path. I tried to find the ridge again, but the steep slope and dense undergrowth made it impossible. My water was running low, and the light was fading fast. Panic rose in my chest, but I forced myself to stay calm. I found a small flat spot under a large pine tree and sat down, pulling my jacket tighter. I took a deep breath, listening carefully. The forest was quiet now, too quiet, and the darkness pressed in around me like a wall. I knew I had to wait until daylight, but the thought of spending the night here, alone with no clear way out, was terrifying. Hours passed slowly. Every sound made me jump. The rustling of leaves, distant animal calls, even my own heartbeat. My mind raced with every possible danger. Getting lost forever, running out of water, falling or injuring myself. I fought the urge to panic, focusing on breathing steadily. When the first light of dawn finally broke through the trees, I stood up carefully. My legs were stiff and sore, but I moved with purpose now. I retraced my steps as best as I could, following broken branches and disturbed leaves. Slowly, the trail reappeared, faint but unmistakable. By mid-morning, I was back on the main path, exhausted but relieved. The sun was warm, and the forest seemed friendly again. I walked quickly now, eager to reach the parking lot and safety. When I finally saw the trailhead, the relief washed over me like a wave. Later, I learned from a ranger that this part of the forest was known for its dangerous terrain and that people sometimes got lost or trapped if they left the main trails. The strange marks I saw were probably from large wildlife, bears or mountain lions, but the footprints and the pile of branches remained a mystery. That hike left me shaken. It was a sharp reminder that nature is beautiful but unforgiving. Respecting the trail and sticking to the path isn't just advice, it's a matter of survival. I never went back to that ridge, and I always double-check my gear and maps before any trip now. The forest doesn't owe you safety, and sometimes, even when you think you know it well, it can surprise you in ways you never expect. The sun was just starting to rise when I pulled my backpack tighter and stepped onto the narrow trail leading deep into the forest. It was a random choice for the day, a path I hadn't planned ahead, just a spot I'd seen on a map and decided to explore on a whim. The air was cool, fresh, with the smell of pine and damp earth. Birds were already calling somewhere above the thick canopy, but the forest was quiet enough to feel like I was the only person in the world. The trail was narrow and uneven, covered in roots and fallen leaves that crunched softly under my boots. I moved carefully, steadying myself with a walking stick I had found along the way. Around me, the trees stood tall and close, their branches weaving a tight ceiling of green. The sunlight filtered in patches, making shifting patterns on the ground. It felt peaceful at first, the kind of quiet that makes you slow down, listen, and breathe deeper. I had been hiking for a few hours when I noticed the trail starting to slope downward toward a small valley. The air changed, got colder and damper. The scent of wet moss and decaying wood grew stronger, mixing with the faint sound of running water somewhere ahead. The path became muddier and more slippery. I had to watch my step carefully, slipping once but catching myself on a low tree branch. The forest here was dense, the trees thicker, the undergrowth tangled with bushes and ferns. I passed a few broken branches and scattered leaves that looked recently disturbed. Nothing unusual, but my mind started to sharpen, senses more alert. I slowed my pace and looked around more often, checking for signs of wildlife or any other hikers. There was nothing. No footprints, no trash, no sound except the distant rush of water. Eventually, I came to a small stream cutting across the trail. The water was clear but fast-moving, and a fallen log formed a rough bridge over it. I tested the log with my foot. It wobbled but seemed solid. I stepped carefully, one foot in front of the other, balancing with my arms. Halfway across, I heard a sharp crack beneath me. The log shifted suddenly, throwing me off balance. I grabbed a nearby tree root and barely saved myself from falling into the cold water. Heart pounding, I caught my breath and crossed the rest of the way more cautiously. On the other side, the trail climbed steeply again, twisting through a thick wall of bushes. As I pushed through the branches, something caught my eye. A pair of worn boots lying abandoned near the edge of the trail. They looked old, covered in mud and scratches, as if left there for a long time. No other gear or signs of a person nearby. I hesitated, feeling a sudden tightness in my chest. I didn't know whose boots they were or why they were there, but the quiet felt different now, heavier somehow. I kept walking but felt like something was watching me. I told myself it was just my imagination, nerves from being alone in the woods. Still, I glanced behind me every few steps. No one was there, just the trees, the shadowed underbrush, and the faint noise of the stream far below. The trail began to level out again as it reached a clearing. The sun broke through the trees fully here, lighting a small patch of wildflowers and tall grass. I stopped to rest, taking off my pack and drinking from my water bottle. The peaceful moment helped calm my racing heart. I looked around and saw a narrow dirt path leading off the main trail into a thicker part of the forest. It wasn't marked on the map and looked less traveled, almost forgotten. Curiosity pushed me forward down that smaller path. It was quieter here, the sounds of the forest muffled by thick ferns and moss-covered rocks. The ground was softer, covered in layers of dead leaves and pine needles. After walking for about 20 minutes, I noticed something strange. Small pieces of torn fabric scattered along the ground, like someone had brushed against bushes or fallen. My heart picked up again. I slowed my pace and scanned the trees, looking for anything unusual. Then I saw it. A thin, twisted rope tied around the trunk of a tree, hanging loosely and swaying slightly in the breeze. It looked old, but not so old that it had been there for years. I didn't like it. It felt out of place in the peaceful forest, like a sign someone had been there recently. I debated turning back, but figured I'd see where the path led. After another 10 minutes, the trail opened into a small, rocky outcrop overlooking the valley. From here, I could see miles of forest stretching out in every direction. The view was beautiful, and for a moment, the tension in my chest eased. Then I noticed something on the rocks below the edge of the outcrop. More fabric, torn and dirty, stuck between stones and bushes. Closer to the edge, there were strange marks in the dirt. Deep scratches and what looked like drag marks leading down the slope into a dense thicket of trees. My stomach sank. I knew then that something had gone wrong here. Maybe someone had gotten hurt, lost, or worse. The abandoned boots, the rope, the torn fabric, it wasn't random. There was a story in this place, one that didn't feel right. I decided not to stay longer. I put my pack back on and headed down the slope carefully, sticking close to the main trail. As I walked, I kept my eyes open for any sign of people or animals. The forest was silent again except for my footsteps and the occasional snap of a twig. When I finally reached the main trail, I felt relieved but still uneasy. The rest of the hike was tense. Every sound, branches breaking, birds flying off, made me jump. I hurried back toward the trailhead, watching the time and the fading daylight. Just as I neared the parking lot, I saw a small group of hikers talking near their cars. They looked relaxed, laughing, the normal image of weekend adventure. But I felt different now. The forest had shown me something dark, something real and scary. I never found out exactly what had happened on that forgotten path or who left those boots behind. But I do know this. The forest is full of stories you don't see on maps or hear in guidebooks. Sometimes the scariest things are the ones that don't make noise, don't show themselves, but leave a trace you can't ignore. That day, the woods reminded me to respect the unknown and to never wander off the trail without thinking twice. Because not all dangers are wild animals or cliffs. They can be hidden in the silence and shadows where no one is watching. And that's the story of the random hike that turned into something I'll never forget. I decided to go hiking alone that weekend, just me and the woods. The trail I picked was supposed to be quiet, not very popular, deep inside the forest. I liked the idea. No crowds, no noise, just nature and my own thoughts. The weather was good, a little cool with a soft breeze, and the sky was clear. I packed my backpack with the basics, water, some snacks, a first aid kit, and a small flashlight, even though I didn't expect to be out after dark. The path started easy enough, a dirt trail lined with tall trees whose leaves were just beginning to change color with the season. The air smelled fresh, like pine and wet earth. I could hear birds somewhere up high and the occasional rustle of small animals in the bushes. At first, everything felt calm, peaceful even. But as I walked deeper, the forest seemed to close in around me. The trees grew thicker, taller, and their branches formed a kind of dark roof above the trail. Shadows stretched long on the ground, even though it was still early afternoon. I kept going, focused on the crunch of my boots on the dry leaves. After about 2 hours, the trail began to slope down into a small valley. The valley was narrow, with steep sides covered in thick underbrush. The ground here was softer, damp, and the air was cooler. I noticed a thin mist starting to rise from the soil. It wasn't fog exactly, just a thin, white haze clinging to the ground. I didn't think much of it, but something about it made the place feel colder, even though the sun was still out. I stopped for a minute to drink some water and eat a granola bar. I looked around and saw no signs of other people, no footprints, no litter, nothing but the untouched forest. The silence was heavier here. It wasn't the peaceful silence of the first part of the hike. It was different, more like the forest was holding its breath. That feeling made me uneasy, but I told myself it was just the place, nothing more. I moved on, following the trail as it wound through the valley. Suddenly, I noticed something strange. The trail seemed less clear, almost like it hadn't been used for a long time. The dirt path was covered with leaves and broken branches, and the trees leaned closer over it. I didn't want to turn back yet, but I made sure to watch my step carefully. Then I heard it, a faint sound that didn't belong to the birds or the wind. It was a low, rustling noise, coming from the bushes just off the trail to my right. At first, I thought it might be a deer or some other small animal, but it was too loud and too close. I froze and listened hard, but the noise stopped. I waited a few seconds, then slowly turned my head to look. There was nothing there, just the dark green leaves shaking slightly in the breeze. I shook my head, telling myself I was imagining things, and kept moving. A little further, I noticed the trail splitting. There was no sign or marker, just two paths, one going uphill and one continuing straight ahead along the valley floor. I hesitated. The map I had didn't show this split clearly, but the uphill path looked less overgrown. I chose the uphill trail, thinking it might lead back out of the valley faster. The climb was harder than I expected. The ground was loose and covered in small rocks, making my footing tricky. I moved carefully, trying not to slip. As I got higher, the trees started to thin out, and I could see a part of the valley below me. The mist was still there, sitting like a white blanket on the ground. The sun was lower now, and long shadows stretched across the landscape. Suddenly, I heard the rustling again, this time from the path behind me. I stopped and looked back but saw nothing. The bushes didn't move and no animal appeared. My heart started beating faster. I told myself again it was nothing, probably just the wind. But the feeling of being watched was growing stronger. I kept climbing, but the noise didn't stop. Every few minutes, the rustling came again, always from somewhere just behind me or off to the side. I slowed down, trying to listen carefully. Then, I heard a different sound. A crunching noise, like someone stepping on dry leaves. This time, it wasn't soft or quick like a small animal. It was heavy and slow, deliberate. I stopped completely, my breath coming fast now. I looked over my shoulder, trying to catch a glimpse of whatever was there. The forest around me was thick, but I could see a small space between the trees. There was nothing in the open, but the sounds kept coming from deeper in the shadows. I didn't see any movement, but I knew I wasn't alone. I felt a sudden rush of panic. I wanted to run, but I also knew running uphill on loose rocks was dangerous. So I kept walking, faster now, glancing back every few seconds. The rustling and crunching stayed close, never too far away. It was like something was following me, but staying just out of sight. After what felt like an hour, but was probably only 20 minutes, I reached the top of the hill. There was a narrow ridge, and the trail opened out to a small clearing. The trees were sparse here, and I could see the sun setting in the distance. The sky was a dark orange, fading to purple. I stopped to catch my breath and looked around. The noise was gone. No rustling, no crunching, only the sound of the wind moving through the grass. I felt relief wash over me, but also confusion. I didn't understand what had been following me, or why it had stopped. I took out my phone to check the time and my location. The battery was low, but I managed to get a signal and sent a quick message to a friend, telling them where I was. I decided to stay in the clearing until it got lighter or someone came for me. The idea of going back down the hill in the dark was too dangerous. As the last light faded, the forest became quiet again. The shadows deepened, and the temperature dropped sharply. I wrapped myself in my jacket and sat down on a rock, trying to stay calm. I didn't hear any sounds after that, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been close to me, something that didn't belong there. The next morning, I found the trail back down without trouble. When I got to my car, I looked around the area again. Near the valley floor, I found strange tracks in the dirt, large footprints, uneven and heavy. They were not from any animal I knew, and they seemed to follow the trail I had taken. They stopped at the edge of the trees near the valley and didn't continue. I reported what I saw to the park rangers. They told me the area had been known for illegal hunters and poachers who sometimes used the forest for their own purposes. It made sense, the noises, the feeling of being followed, the tracks. It wasn't a ghost or a fairy tale, but something much more real and dangerous. That day taught me something important about the woods. Nature can be beautiful and peaceful, but it can also hide things that are hard to see and even harder to understand. I was lucky to get out safe. Now, whenever I go hiking, I pay more attention to the signs around me and never ignore that feeling when something doesn't feel right. The forest isn't just trees and animals. It's a place where people sometimes hide, and not all of them mean well. That's the real fear, the kind you can't just walk away from without looking over your shoulder. I had picked a random trail on the map, a thin line cutting through a mountain range I had never been to before. I only chose it because it was far from everything, far from crowds, far from paved roads, far from anything that could distract me. I wanted a quiet hike, something that would clear my head. It was late autumn, the air dry and cold, and the daylight hours were getting shorter every day. I knew it was a risky time of year to go alone, but that was part of why I wanted it. I wanted the silence that came with being the only person out there. The drive to the trailhead took hours, most of it on narrow roads that curved around dark pine forests. When I got out of the car, the wind was pushing dried leaves across the ground, making a soft scraping sound that echoed through the empty valley. I tightened the straps on my pack and started walking. The trail was wide at first, damp from melted frost, covered with a thin layer of mud that clung to my boots. The air smelled like wet soil and old wood. Every few minutes, a pine cone cracked under my foot, and the sound shot through the quiet like a small firework. As I climbed higher, the forest changed. The trees grew tighter together, the ground steeper, the trail narrower. Moss clung to the rocks like thick green fur. The wind barely reached the deeper parts of the forest, so everything felt strangely still, like the air itself was holding its breath. I kept going, pushing myself harder than I needed to, wanting to get as far from the road as possible before sunset. The first time I felt uneasy was when I noticed how quickly the forest swallowed the trail behind me. Whenever I turned my head, the trees seemed to close in. Their dark trunks lined up so perfectly that it felt like I had walked into a place that didn't want to be seen by anyone. The trail became a faint scar on the ground, barely visible under fallen needles and thin roots. For a moment I wondered if I should have brought a GPS instead of relying on a paper map, but I pushed the thought away. I wanted the challenge. I wanted to feel alone. Hours passed, and the trail led me deeper into the mountains. The sun was already low, drifting between the branches in thin golden lines. My legs were starting to ache, and my shoulders throbbed under the weight of my pack. I kept moving because I didn't want to stop in the fading light. I wanted to reach a flat area shown on the map, a clearing near a stream where I planned to rest before turning back in the morning. When I reached the clearing, it didn't look like I expected. The ground was uneven, scattered with fallen branches. The trees formed a tight ring around it, as if the forest had once been whole and something had forced its way through. The stream shown on the map was nothing but a thin trickle now, barely enough to dampen the rocks. The dirt around it looked disturbed, like something had scraped across it recently. I felt the same uneasy feeling again, stronger this time, like someone had breathed cold air across the back of my neck. I dropped my pack and walked around the clearing, studying the ground. There were long marks in the dirt, not footprints, but narrow lines, almost like someone had dragged something heavy and strayed across the area. They crossed one another in strange paths, some leading into the forest, some disappearing behind thick undergrowth. I kneeled down to touch one of the grooves. The dirt inside it was fresh, soft, not hardened by cold or time. Whatever made the marks had passed through not long before I arrived. I stood up and scanned the trees. Nothing moved. No wind, no animals, not even a bird. The silence was so complete that I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. The longer I stared at the forest, the more it felt like something was watching from inside it, hidden behind the dark wall of trunks. The air had the heavy stillness of a place that had been disturbed just before I arrived. I didn't set up camp. Something in me refused. My instincts, dull most days, were suddenly sharp. I packed my things again and decided to head back before the sun fully disappeared. I didn't want to stay in that clearing when darkness fell. I could feel the mountains turning cold around me. The temperature was dropping fast. As soon as I stepped back onto the trail, I felt how different everything had become. The forest didn't look the same. Shadows grew long, twisting into shapes that stretched across the ground. The trail that had felt clear when I arrived now seemed uncertain. The trees leaned inward slightly, enough to make the path feel tighter, like the forest was closing a fist around me. As I walked, I kept seeing those strange drag marks again, here and there across the trail. Thin lines cutting through the dirt, crossing the path in directions that made no sense. Each one looked slightly fresher than the last. I couldn't understand how that was possible, since I hadn't heard anything. No footsteps, no sliding sound, nothing. But the marks were there, and they were becoming more frequent. The deeper I moved, the more the forest changed in ways I didn't understand. I knew I was following the same trail I had taken hours earlier, but the shapes of the trees felt different. The spacing felt wrong. branches seemed lower, thicker, closer to my head. Every few minutes I would swear I heard something behind me. Just a soft sound, like something brushing lightly against the ground. But whenever I stopped and turned, the forest stood frozen in place. My breath started to fog in the air, even though it wasn't that cold when I started the hike. The temperature felt like it had dropped 10 degrees in the last hour. The forest floor was darker than it should have been, as if the sun had vanished too quickly. My legs were tired, but fear pushed me forward harder than the original excitement ever did. I just wanted to reach the road again, get in my car, and leave. When the first real sign of danger appeared, it didn't make a sound. I saw a long, fresh groove in the ground, much deeper than the others. The dirt around it was pushed up on both sides, and the mark continued into the undergrowth, disappearing into a place so dark that even daylight wouldn't have penetrated it. I stared at it for a long time, trying to understand what could have made it. It wasn't from a tool, wasn't from an animal, wasn't from anything I could recognize. It was as if something had been dragged through the forest, something heavy enough to leave a trench. I didn't want to get closer. I didn't want to know more. I stepped around it and kept moving. But a few minutes later, I saw another trench, then another, each one deeper, each one cutting across the trail at angles that didn't match any path. And the forest around them felt wrong, like the trees had shifted slightly, as if something large had forced its way through them. The sun finally disappeared, leaving only a dull gray light that faded fast. I pulled out my flashlight and kept walking, the beam shaking in my tired hand. The cold had sunk deep into the forest now, biting through my jacket and making my fingers numb. My breathing felt loud in my ears, too loud, like it didn't belong in the quiet around me. When I finally saw the last stretch of trail that led toward the road, I almost cried from relief. My legs felt weak, and my chest was tight. I kept imagining something moving behind me, something sliding across the ground without making a sound. I didn't even want to turn around anymore. I just wanted to get out. When I stepped into the open space near the trailhead, the air felt warmer, like the forest had been holding the cold inside itself. I didn't stop walking until I reached my car. My hands were shaking so badly that I struggled to get the keys out. When I finally got the engine running, the feeling of safety hit me so hard that it made my vision blur for a moment. As I drove away, I looked in the rearview mirror and saw the entrance to the trail fade behind a curtain of trees. The forest stood there silently, tall and patient, like it had been waiting for something. I knew I would never return. Whatever had moved through that clearing, whatever had carved those deep marks into the dirt, was real, and it was still out there somewhere in those mountains. The next day, when I thought back on the hike, the strangest part was how clear the feeling had been. It wasn't confusion or fear of getting lost. It was something more exact. It felt like I had walked into a place at the wrong time. A place where something had recently passed through. Something that didn't want to be seen. Something that didn't want anyone nearby. The marks in the dirt were real. The silence in the forest was real. And the sense of being watched from the shadows was real enough that I can still feel it when I think about it. The forest had felt alive that day in a way that didn't make sense, and the further I went, the more it felt like it had been closing around me, step by step, without me noticing until it was almost too late. I've gone hiking many times since then, but I never choose random trails anymore. I never go deep into forests I don't know. And I never ignore my instincts when the air turns too still and the ground shows signs of something I can't explain. That trail is still out there, hidden in the mountains, but whatever made those long, deep marks is still out there too. And I'm certain that if I had stayed in that clearing even a little longer, the silence around me would not have stayed empty. It would have broken, and I would not be here to write this. I started the hike late in the morning, later than I should have, but I felt confident because I had walked smaller trails in the same region many times before. This time I wanted something longer and quieter, something deep enough in the hills that I could feel alone but still return before dark. I picked a route that was marked on the map but never popular. The path climbed through thick trees and old rocks that looked like they had been sitting there forever. The air felt cold even though the sun was out, and the wind moved through the branches in a slow, steady way that made it sound like everything was breathing. The first part of the hike felt normal. My legs warmed up, and the sound of my boots on the dirt mixed with the rustling leaves. I kept checking the map every now and then, making sure I was moving in the right direction. There was nothing strange about the place at first. It was just quiet, the kind of quiet that builds slowly until you realize you have not heard another person for a long time. I liked that feeling, at least in the beginning. As I went deeper into the hills, the trail grew narrow. The trees pressed in closer, their branches hanging low over the path. Some parts were so overgrown that it looked like no one had walked through for weeks. The soil felt softer here, like it had been freshly turned. I didn't think much of it until I noticed how many footprints there were. Not human ones. They were long, thin marks, dragging patterns, zigzags that crossed the path in strange overlapping lines. At first I thought they were from animals, maybe snakes or something else sliding through, but the lines were too wide and heavy. They sank too deep into the dirt. Still, I kept moving, telling myself it didn't matter. The air grew colder the higher I climbed. I expected it to be cooler, but the temperature dropped fast enough that my fingers stiffened even inside my pockets. My breath started to look like smoke. I checked the sky and saw a thin layer of clouds spreading across the sun, dimming the light. It wasn't supposed to rain, but the weather felt wrong, like it had shifted fast without warning. After another hour, I reached a part of the trail where the trees cleared a little. From there, I had a view of the valley behind me, but something about it felt off. The valley looked farther away than it should have been, almost stretched out. The distance between hills looked wider, and the shadows seemed darker, like the sun had dropped lower than it really had. I tried to shake off the thought, telling myself it was just because I had been walking for too long without a break. The path continued upward, weaving between tall rocks and thick bushes. That was when I started hearing something behind me. It wasn't footsteps or voices. It was a faint dragging sound, soft but consistent. Came and went, sometimes close, sometimes farther back. Every time I stopped walking, the sound stopped too. I stood still for a long moment, listening to my own breathing, trying to hear anything else. Nothing happened. The forest stayed quiet. But as soon as I took a few more steps, the soft dragging started again, almost matching my pace. I didn't turn around at first because I didn't want to see nothing and make myself more nervous. I kept walking, faster now, pushing through bushes and low branches. My shoulders felt tight, and my heartbeat grew louder. The dragging sound followed again, a few seconds late, like something was moving right after I moved. Eventually, I forced myself to look back. There was nothing on the trail behind me, just trees, rocks, and shadows that looked thicker than before. But the soft dirt still showed fresh marks trailing across the path. Long, deep, uneven grooves, leading straight toward where I stood. I kept going because I didn't know what else to do. The trail was supposed to loop around and meet another path that would take me back down toward the parking area. I told myself if I reached the top section, I could move faster downhill and lose whatever was making those marks. The problem was that the trail became harder to follow. The signs I had been using at first, paint marks on rocks and faded wooden posts, stopped appearing. The path bent in strange ways, splitting in narrow lines that didn't match the map. Some parts looked like animal tracks more than hiking trails. I felt like I was walking in circles even though I kept checking my compass. The trees all looked the same. The rocks all blended together. The ground grew softer again, and those same dragging lines crossed in front of me every 50 or 60 steps. My stomach tightened when I realized something. The lines were fresher now. The edges of the dirt were sharper. Whatever was making them was close. Too close. I pushed myself harder. I climbed over a fallen tree and nearly slipped on the other side because the ground was wet here. Not rain wet, more like someone had spilled water across the dirt. The moisture made the footprints clearer. The dragging lines looked deeper, almost like something heavy had been pulled through. The marks headed uphill, the same direction I was walking, which confused me because earlier they had been behind me. It felt like the lines were appearing wherever I went, not leading to something but surrounding me. When I finally reached the highest part of the trail, I expected a clearing with a good view. Instead, I found a patch of dead trees, all gray, all stripped of leaves, as if they had been burned long ago even though there was no sign of fire. The place felt colder than the rest of the hike. The dragging sound started again, louder this time, just behind the line of dead trees. I couldn't see anything moving, but I knew it was there. The feeling crawled through my chest. The same feeling you get when someone stands behind you even if you don't hear them. I didn't stop. I turned downhill and followed the steepest slope, even though it wasn't the real trail. I just wanted to get out. The ground slipped under my boots, rocks rolling and crashing downward as I tried to stay balanced. The dragging sound continued behind me, then stopped, then started again, like something was testing how fast I was moving. The slope finally led me to a narrow stream that cut through the forest. The cold water soaked my socks as soon as I stepped into it, but I didn't care. I followed the stream because water usually leads to bigger paths or lower ground. The forest around me felt alive in the worst way. Branches shook even when the wind was still. The shadows looked like they were stretching, and every few minutes, I saw those same dragging marks cut across the slippery stones near the stream. I walked until my legs felt like they were burning. The stream widened, and soon I saw a man-made sign half buried in weeds, pointing toward a maintenance road. When I reached the road, everything looked normal again. The temperature felt right. The wind sounded like real wind. The dragging noise stopped completely. By the time I made it back to my car, my clothes were soaked, my hands were shaking, and the sun was already sinking behind the hills. I kept looking back at the tree line, expecting to see someone or something standing there, but nothing showed. The forest looked calm, quiet, harmless. When I got home, I checked the hiking map again. The trail I took was listed as maintained and clear. No fallen trees, no dead patches, no warnings. But what bothered me most was the small note printed near the bottom. Trail markings refreshed monthly. I had not seen a single fresh mark after the halfway point. Whatever path I ended up on was not the one shown on the map, and the dragging marks that followed me were not from any animal I know. I still don't know how I got off the proper route, but I do know one thing very clearly. Something else was using those hills, something quiet, heavy, and patient, and it followed me until I reached the road. I haven't gone hiking since. I started the hike early in the morning when the sky was still a dull gray and the light felt soft and harmless. I remember the cold air on my face when I stepped out of my car at the small dirt pull-off beside the trail. It was the kind of cold that made the world feel clean for a moment. I tightened the straps on my pack and followed the narrow path that disappeared into the woods. I had picked this trail because it was marked as remote, quiet, and almost forgotten. I wanted space away from noise and people. I wanted to clear my head. I didn't think about danger. I only thought about silence. The path bent sharply around tall pine trees and thick undergrowth. The ground was damp from rain the night before, and my boots sank slightly into the mud with every step. I kept moving deeper, letting the forest swallow me. The smell of wet soil and old leaves felt almost comforting. But there was something else mixed into it, something faint like metal or rust. I ignored it at first. Trails had all kinds of strange smells after rain. For the first hour, everything felt normal. Birds moved high above me. I heard branches snapping under small animals I never saw. The air stayed cool, but the kind of cool that felt good when hiking with weight on your back. My breathing found a steady rhythm. The forest felt empty in a peaceful way, but the deeper I went, the quieter it became. The bird sounds faded. Even the wind felt thin, like it had stopped moving between the trees. The silence wasn't peaceful anymore. It felt like the woods were holding their breath. I slowed down, listening, trying to understand what was different. I didn't hear anything unusual, but the air felt heavier. I remember brushing my hand across my neck because it felt like something cold had passed close to me, even though nothing was there. The metallic smell got stronger the farther I walked. It didn't make sense. It didn't smell like a dead animal. It was sharper, like old metal tools left out in rain. I kept trying to tell myself it was nothing. Maybe rusty fence wire somewhere in the trees, maybe old equipment from hikers long gone. Everything I thought of felt weak, but I used those excuses anyway. The trail started to climb and the slope grew steeper. Roots twisted out of the ground like ropes, forcing me to step carefully. The forest on both sides grew thicker, almost tangled. The sky was barely visible now. Only thin streaks of pale light filtered down. As I pulled myself up a steep patch, I saw something strange off to the right, dirt that had been disturbed recently. It looked like someone had dug into the ground and then tried to cover it again. The soil was piled in uneven clumps. I stopped and stared at it for a moment. It didn't look like an animal digging. It looked too deliberate, too clean. I didn't want to think about it, so I kept moving. After another half hour, I reached a flat stretch where the trail opened slightly. I planned to rest there, drink some water, adjust my pack. I set my hand on a fallen tree to steady myself while I caught my breath. That's when I noticed something carved into the wood. Long lines, deep grooves. They didn't form letters or shapes I recognized. They looked like someone had run a knife back and forth in the same spot over and over with enough force to cut deep into the trunk. Some grooves were fresh. I could tell because little curls of pale wood still hung from the edges. Someone had done this not long ago. Maybe recently, maybe very recently. I felt something move through my chest then. An uneasiness that wasn't dramatic or sudden, but slow, like water rising inside a container. I looked around again. The forest felt wrong. Felt too still, too watchful. My instincts told me to turn around. I listened. The way back felt different from the moment I started heading down. I kept checking behind me even though I told myself not to. I moved faster than before, almost too fast for the muddy ground, slipping a few times but catching myself. The silence grew thicker. My own footsteps sounded too loud. The smell of metal didn't fade. It followed me like it clung to the air. At one point I stopped again, not by choice but because something felt off. I looked down and saw a single footprint in the mud beside my own path. It was fresh, deep, slightly larger than my own boot print. It pointed in the same direction I had been walking, not across the trail or away from it. Down the trail, toward the parking area. It wasn't mine. I knew exactly where I had stepped earlier. This wasn't there before. Someone had stepped there after I passed. I felt heat rise through my body even though the air was still cold. My hands shook a little. I scanned the trees again and again, but nothing moved. Not even a leaf. I forced myself to keep going. I didn't run, but my pace was just slow enough to stay in control. My breathing got louder in my ears. The smell got stronger. I kept imagining someone just out of sight, stepping where I stepped, watching from behind the trees, waiting for me to slow down again. When I finally reached the part of the trail where I could see a thin patch of sky again, I felt a small wave of relief. It didn't last long. Near the base of a large tree, right on the edge of the trail, I noticed something hanging on a low branch. It was a thin piece of torn fabric. Dark, wet, stiff. I didn't know what it came from. A jacket, maybe, pants, but it looked wrong. It looked like it had been torn while someone was moving fast through the woods. Not placed, not left on purpose, torn off during motion. I didn't touch it. My legs hurt from how hard I was walking now, but I didn't slow down. Every few steps I felt like something was behind me, not touching me, not close enough to hear, but just far enough to remain hidden. It felt like the forest was pushing me out, like something inside it didn't want me there. When I finally saw my car through the trees, everything in my body tightened. I walked straight toward it, not looking around anymore because I was afraid that if I saw something, I might freeze. I opened the door, threw my pack inside, and got in. My hands were shaking so much that I almost dropped my keys. When the engine started, the sound felt too loud for the quiet woods, but it was the first time since leaving my car that I felt safe. As I backed out of the pull-off, I looked once more at the entrance of the trail. The trees looked normal again, harmless, like any regular forest. But I kept thinking about the footprint, the carved wood, the disturbed soil, the smell that didn't make sense. I knew those things weren't normal. I knew someone had been out there, someone who didn't want to be seen, someone who had followed the same path I walked. I didn't report anything. I didn't go back for proof. I didn't tell anyone for a long time, but I've thought about it almost every day since. I know I left that trail at the right moment. I know that if I had stayed even 10 more minutes, maybe 5, maybe even just long enough to take my usual rest break, the person whose footprint I saw would have caught up. I don't hike remote trails alone anymore. I don't trust quiet forests the way I used to, because the truth is simple and real. There was someone out there that day. Someone close. Someone moving behind me. And the only reason I ever made it back to my car was because I turned around the moment my instincts told me something was wrong. If I had ignored that feeling, I am certain I never would have stepped out of those woods again. I started the hike late in the morning, later than I planned, but the sky was clear and the air felt cool enough that I didn't think it would matter. I wanted a quiet day away from everything, somewhere I could just walk, breathe, and let my mind go silent for a while. I picked a trail I had never tried before, something far into the hills, something people online described as simple but lonely. That word, lonely, was the part that made me choose it. I didn't want crowds or noise. I wanted trees, dirt, and the feeling of being completely on my own. The first hour was easy. The path started wide, almost smooth, cutting through short grass and scattered rocks. I could hear nothing except my boots breaking twigs and the distant sound of a river that ran somewhere out of sight. The deeper I went, the taller the trees grew, until they closed over me in a thick ceiling of branches. The sunlight broke through in narrow lines that wobbled whenever the wind shifted the leaves. Everything smelled like damp earth and old wood. It was the kind of smell that made me feel like I was far from the world I knew. After a while, the path began to change. It narrowed slowly at first, then more sharply. The dirt became uneven and soft in places, like something had scraped it over and over. I had to watch where I stepped because the ground kept dipping under my weight. I didn't see anyone else. Hours passed, and I didn't hear human footsteps or voices. No one coming or going. Only birds sometimes, and even they sounded distant. I kept going because I wanted to see where the path actually led. I checked my phone a couple of times, but the signal dropped to almost nothing. I wasn't too worried. I had my backpack, water, a small first aid kit, and I knew I could just turn around and walk back if I needed to. But minutes turned into more minutes, and soon I reached an area that didn't look like a trail anymore. The ground spread out into a huge open space filled with tall grass as high as my knees. The grass looked flattened in long, wide lines, like something had moved through it again and again. I didn't want to walk through that grass, but that was where the worn ground led, so I followed it. As I stepped inside it, the tall blades rubbed my legs and left thin scratches on my skin. I kept hearing small things move around me, tiny sounds like insects or mice, but sometimes it felt heavier than that, like something larger was shifting a little farther away. I kept telling myself it was nothing, maybe just the wind bending the grass, but the air felt too still for that. By the time I reached the other end of the tall grass, I noticed something strange. The flattened lines were not random. They curved and crossed in patterns that looked almost like trails, but they weren't made by people. They were too wide, too messy, and they cut through thick plants in a way human steps never would. I tried not to think too deeply about it. I just kept walking. The forest after that stretch grew darker. The trees here were older and thicker, their trunks covered in deep cuts and peeled bark. Some of the marks looked fresh, like the wood underneath was still a lighter color. I felt a soft unease rise in my stomach, the kind that made me walk a little faster without realizing it. Soon I heard a sound behind me. It was faint at first, a dull thud, then another, like something heavy pressing down on the ground. I stopped walking and the sound stopped. I stood there, staring at the trees behind me, waiting. I couldn't see anything, but the silence felt heavier. I started moving again, this time slower, more careful. After a few steps, the sound started again. Thud, thud, thud. Same pace as mine, just a small distance behind. I didn't turn around. Something inside me told me not to. I kept my eyes forward and tried to make my steps quieter. My heartbeat felt too loud in my chest, like anything could hear it. The forest around me felt tighter, the trees closer together, the light dimmer. My breathing came out faster even though I tried to calm myself. After a few minutes, the sound changed. Instead of steady footsteps, it lasted longer. A sliding noise, like something dragging through leaves. I felt the hair on the back of my neck lift. I told myself it could be a deer or some animal trying to circle around me. Something harmless. But those thoughts didn't feel real enough to stop the fear building inside me. I finally reached a small slope where the ground dropped down into a dry creek bed. The dirt there was soft and pale. When I stepped into it, I saw huge impressions in the soil. Not footprints, just deep marks, uneven and spaced apart like whatever made them walked with long, heavy steps. They weren't anything I recognized. I crouched for a second, staring at them, trying to measure them with my hand. They were bigger than my whole hand spread out. Behind me, the dragging sound got louder. I stood up fast and almost stumbled. I didn't look back. I climbed out of the creek bed and walked as quickly as I could without running. My legs were shaking. The sound behind me didn't stop. It followed at the same distance, sometimes closer, sometimes farther, but always there. At one point, I heard the grass behind me snap under something heavy. The trail started to rise, and the climb made my chest burn. I knew I had to keep moving. I didn't want to run because I felt like running would make whatever was behind me move faster too. But every part of me wanted to sprint. My hands were sweating, and I kept wiping them on my clothes even though it didn't help. The trees ahead finally began to thin. I saw a patch of open sky and pushed toward it. My legs hurt, my back hurt, my whole body felt tight with fear. The ground here had more rocks, and I kept slipping on them. Every small slide of my boot felt like a scream inside my mind. But I kept going until I reached the clearing. And then I saw the old wooden sign. It was worn down, but I recognized the faded letters. It marked the beginning of the trail, the same point I had passed hours earlier. Somehow, without thinking about it, I had looped all the way back. I didn't even care how. I just kept walking straight until I reached the parking area. Only then did I turn around. There was nothing there. Just trees and the quiet breeze shaking their leaves. No movement, no sound. The forest looked calm, peaceful, almost harmless. But the ground near the trail entrance had thin, shallow drag marks in the dirt, leading back into the trees. I didn't stay to study them. I unlocked my car with shaking hands, got inside, and drove away without looking in the mirrors. When I reached the main road, I finally let myself breathe. I still don't know what followed me through that forest. I only know it wasn't my imagination. The sounds, the marks, the way something moved whenever I did. All of it was real. I haven't gone back to that trail since, and I don't plan to. Even now, sometimes when I walk alone on quiet paths, I hear small thuds behind me, and for a second my whole body freezes, waiting to see if something is still following me. But nothing ever does. And that's the only reason I sleep at night. I went hiking alone in early autumn, on a trail I had never tried before. I picked it because it looked quiet on the map, a long line that curved through mountains, forests, and old logging areas where almost no one went anymore. I wanted silence, clean air, and time to clear my head. I packed light, checked the weather twice, and told myself it would be an easy day with long, slow walking and nothing else. But the trail felt wrong the moment I stepped onto it, even though I could not explain why. Nothing spooky, nothing strange, just a feeling that the place did not want people in it. The path started wide and open, covered with dry leaves that cracked under my boots. The air smelled like cold soil and old wood. The forest was quiet in a heavy way, like it was holding its breath. I followed the trail deeper, expecting it to open up near a ridge, but the trees grew thicker instead. Branches hung lower, the ground sloped unevenly, and the dirt became soft under my feet. I kept walking because I told myself it was just a normal forest and I was overthinking it. But the silence stayed thick around me, and every time I stopped walking I felt like something else in the woods had stopped too. After about an hour, I reached an area where the trees thinned out. It looked like an old work zone from years ago. The ground was torn up in places, and broken stumps were scattered everywhere. Rusty metal pieces stuck out of the dirt, maybe parts of old tools or abandoned equipment. Everything looked untouched for a long time. The air there was colder, and I noticed the wind died down completely. My skin crawled a little, but I kept going because I wanted to reach the river shown on the map. As I walked farther, I saw footprints in the dirt. At first I thought they were my own from earlier, but the pattern was different. They were deeper, heavier, and spaced in a way that made me stop. Someone had been walking fast, maybe running, and the prints were fresh enough that the edges had not collapsed. There were no dog prints, no bike tracks, nothing else. Just one set of footprints that went straight ahead. Something about the shape looked off to me. The steps were uneven in length, like whoever made them kept losing balance or stumbling. I kept following the trail, but the footprints stayed ahead of me, always fresh-looking, never fading. It felt like I was walking behind someone who was only minutes away, even though I never heard anything. No voices, no breaking branches, no sign of movement. The woods were too still, too quiet. Then the trail began to climb. The slope was long and steady, and the dirt turned into loose rock. My legs started to burn as I climbed, and I had to stop a few times to breathe. Every time I stopped, the silence dug into me. No wind, no bugs, no birds, just my heartbeat and my breathing. I looked back once and the trail behind me felt wrong, like it was longer than it should have been, like the forest had stretched when I wasn't looking. When I finally reached the top of the hill, I saw something that made my stomach twist. The footprints ended there in a messy circle, as if the person had turned around over and over, trying to figure out where to go. But there were deeper impressions too, like they had suddenly started to run downhill again, but not along the trail. They had gone straight into the trees. The branches were snapped, smaller plants crushed, and bits of dirt sprayed in a way that showed fast movement. Whatever happened there, the person did not calmly walk off the path. They had bolted. I wanted to turn around right then, but stubbornness kept me moving. I told myself it was just some scared hiker who ran for reasons I would never know. I kept walking down the trail, slower this time, watching the trees. The forest felt tighter around me, like the trunks had shifted closer. The air smelled heavier, damp in a way it hadn't earlier. After another hour of walking, I reached the river. But it was not the relaxing spot I imagined. The water was low, showing sharp rocks and broken tree roots sticking into the stream. The current made a low grinding sound, like it was dragging debris along the bottom. The footprints were back again in the mud, deep and close together like the person had been trying to steady themselves. They followed the riverbank for about 30 meters and then stopped near a collapsed pile of branches, like the remains of a fallen tree. The mud there was torn up, and the ground looked like someone had slipped hard, dragging their foot while trying to get up. The trail was supposed to cross the river at that point, but the small wooden footbridge shown on the map was gone. I found its remains downstream, broken and twisted in the rocks. I tried to decide if I should continue or turn back. The sun was still up, but the light felt weaker under the thick trees. I knew that going back meant climbing the long hills again and walking through the same silent stretch. Going forward meant following the river until the trail rejoined on the other side. I chose forward, even though my chest felt tight with unease. I walked along the river for maybe half an hour when I heard it for the first time. Not a voice, not an animal, but a sound like fast, sharp breathing. It came from deeper in the woods, faint but steady. It rose and fell quickly, like someone trying to calm down after running for too long. My skin went cold. I stood still and tried to listen harder, but the sound stopped instantly, like it had been waiting for me to notice. That was when I realized I might not be alone on the trail at all. I kept moving, slower, watching the trees. Every few minutes I heard a small sound. Branches bending, a rock turning, soft dirt shifting. Not constantly, just enough to tell me something was moving when I moved. I tried to convince myself it was an animal, but the pattern felt wrong. The movement matched my pace too well. When I stopped, everything stopped. When I walked, faint steps followed. The riverbank narrowed until I couldn't walk beside it anymore. I had to climb back up into the woods to stay on higher ground. The path was rough and uneven, with roots that grabbed at my boots. The late afternoon light was fading now, turning the forest dim and gray. My breathing got faster because I could feel it. Whatever was in the woods was closer. Then I saw something that froze me in place. A torn piece of fabric was stuck on a branch. A dark blue jacket sleeve, ripped straight down as if someone had yanked themselves free while running. The fabric was dirty and damp. It looked fresh. Right below it, the dirt was crushed with deep footprints. The same ones I had been seeing all day. I felt panic start to rise in me. I kept walking, but now I moved fast. My hands were cold and shaking. I could hear movement behind me. Louder now, not hiding anymore. Soft, uneven steps that matched my speed. The forest around me felt like it was closing in, the trees all leaning the same way as if watching. I pushed myself harder, almost jogging along the trail. My chest hurt from breathing too fast. The sounds behind me grew clearer, quick steps, then silence, then steps again. Whoever or whatever it was staying just far enough that I couldn't see it, but close enough that I could hear it. Finally, I saw a sign nailed crookedly to a tree. It pointed toward the parking area. The trail sloped down sharply, and I could see the faint glint of metal from cars far below through the trees. Relief hit me so strong my knees almost buckled. I ran downhill, sliding on loose dirt, grabbing branches to keep my balance. The sound behind me broke into full running now. Fast, heavy steps crashing through leaves and dirt. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see what was there. When I reached the bottom of the slope, the trees thinned and the parking lot came into view. The sound stopped instantly. Everything behind me went silent again. I walked fast across the open space, not turning around once, not trusting what I might see. When I reached my car, I opened the door with shaking hands, got inside, locked it, and sat there breathing hard until my heartbeat slowed. When I finally forced myself to look back at the trail entrance, nothing was there. Just empty trees and a narrow path disappearing into the woods. No movement, no person, no animal. But as I drove away, I realized something that made my stomach tighten again. The footprints I had followed all day never showed any sign of turning back. Whoever made them never walked out of those woods. And whatever followed me down that last hill, it wasn't following the footprints. It was following me. I started that hike on a cold morning when the sky looked heavy and low, almost like it was pressing down on the mountains around me. I had picked a random trail deep inside a lesser-known national forest, far away from the busy places where families usually go. I wanted quiet. I wanted space to think. I wanted to feel small for a while. I parked my car at a tiny dirt pull-off that barely fit two vehicles, tightened the straps of my pack, and stepped into the woods with the kind of confidence that usually comes right before something goes wrong. The trail started off well. It was narrow but clear, running between tall pines that held the cold air like a giant freezer. The ground felt damp under my boots, soft in some spots where old needles and wet soil mixed together. My breath came out in small white clouds. Everything smelled like sap and cold dirt. For the first few hours, it felt peaceful. I just walked, listening to my steps, feeling the weight of my pack settle across my back. But the deeper I went, the more it changed. The trail signs were old and faded. Some looked like they hadn't been touched in years. The path thinned out. The woods started to feel tighter, darker. The trees grew closer together, leaning over the trail in a way that felt almost deliberate, like they were trying to close me in. I kept going anyway. I kept telling myself that I had come out here to be alone, and this was exactly what being alone felt like. After a while, I began to notice something strange. The forest was quiet, so quiet that it felt unnatural. No birds, no insects. Even the wind seemed reluctant to move. It was the kind of silence that made you aware of your own heartbeat, your own breathing, your own footsteps hitting the mud. Every sound I made felt too loud. I pushed deeper into the woods, telling myself there was nothing wrong. I had enough water, enough food, and enough daylight to make it back if something went off. But the deeper I went, the more it felt like the forest was turning into something unfamiliar. The smell changed too. Less pine, more wet rot, like something old had been sitting under the soil for a long time, soaking in all the moisture and slowly breaking down. About 4 hours in, the trail just disappeared. It didn't fade slowly, it ended. One moment I was following a narrow dirt line through the trees, and the next it was just gone. No fork, no warning, nothing. I stood there staring at the last patch of path like it might suddenly reappear, but all I saw ahead of me was a thick line of undergrowth and trees twisted into each other. I didn't panic, not at first. I checked my map, checked my GPS, tried to backtrack a little, but everything looked the same. Every tree had the same rough bark. Every patch of ground looked like every other patch of ground. Even the footprints I expected to find behind me didn't look clear. The soil was too soft, too uneven, and whatever prints I had left earlier were gone. I decided to push forward just a little, hoping to find the trail again. I moved slowly, using my boots to flatten the brush enough so I wouldn't lose my direction. The deeper I pushed, the worse the ground got. Turned wet, sticky, almost black, like the earth itself was rotting. My boots sank a little with every step. I could feel cold water creeping through the fabric, and the smell got stronger, old mud mixed with something metallic. Something almost like rust. A while later, I saw the first sign that something was wrong in a way that went beyond a lost hiker. In the distance, between two thick trees, I saw what looked like a torn jacket hanging from a branch. It was dark green. The sleeves were ripped. The bottom half was coated in thick mud that had dried into hard clumps. I approached it slowly, feeling the weight in my chest grow heavier. When I got close enough, I could see scratch marks across the fabric. Long, uneven, rough, like someone had dragged it across the ground or forced it through sharp branches. It didn't look like it had been left there on purpose. It looked like someone had been wearing it when it got torn off. My throat tightened, but I kept moving. The sunlight had started to fade, turning the forest dim and shadowy. I kept glancing behind me even though I told myself there was no reason to. Every time I turned, I expected to see someone standing there, but all I saw were trees, leaning in closer than before. A few minutes later, I found more. A broken trekking pole, a glove half buried in mud, a crushed metal water bottle with dents that didn't look like they came from a fall. All of it sitting in a rough line that led even deeper into the woods. It felt like following the trail of someone's panic. As I walked, I noticed something else, something subtle but terrifying. There were footprints in the mud. Not mine, not fresh but not old either. They looked uneven, like the person who made them had been limping or stumbling. The stride was long in some places, short in others. They went in a straight line, deeper into the trees. I should have turned around. I should have forced myself to retrace my steps. But something about seeing those prints made me feel responsible, like there was a chance that someone needed help. So I followed them. The forest got harder to move through. Thorny shrubs scraped the sides of my legs. Branches tugged at my pack. The mud grew deeper, almost swallowing my boots. Several times I had to grab tree trunks just to pull myself forward. My heartbeat felt slow and heavy, almost painful, like my body was telling me to stop. Then I found the area where the footprints ended. The ground opened into a small clearing, maybe 10 meters across. The trees circled it tightly, bending inward like they were growing toward the center. The mud in the clearing was disturbed, torn up in long, dragged paths, like something heavy had moved through it. There were deep lines etched into the mud, straight and narrow, like someone had shoved something heavy across the ground with force. But the footprints ended right at the edge of the clearing, and there were no prints leaving it. Whoever came here didn't walk out. I stood completely still, trying to figure out what I was looking at. My mind raced with possibilities: an injured hiker crawling, a person collapsing, an animal attack. But the marks didn't look like any of those things. They were too controlled, too straight, too intentional. The silence grew heavier. Even my breathing felt too loud. Then I heard something, faint, but real. A soft crack from the woods behind me. Not the wind. Not an animal I could recognize. It was slow, careful, like something placing its weight down with intention. Then another. Then nothing. I stayed frozen for several seconds, staring straight ahead, afraid to turn around. My skin felt like it had turned to ice. My instincts were screaming at me, telling me I shouldn't be there. telling me I had walked into something I didn't understand and didn't want to understand. I finally forced myself to move. I didn't run at first. I walked fast, trying to stay calm, trying not to slip in the mud. I tried to retrace where I came from, marking trees with my eyes, forcing my brain to lock onto every familiar shape. After a few minutes, the strange clearing disappeared behind me, but the silence didn't lift. I kept hearing faint cracks, spaced out, never close, but always somewhere behind me, like something was keeping pace. Eventually, I broke into a full run. Branches hit my arms. Mud splashed up my legs. My breath tore out of my chest in sharp bursts. I didn't care. All I wanted was to get out of the forest before the daylight died completely. Somehow, after what felt like hours, I found the real trail again. I nearly fell onto it. My legs shook. The forest around me still felt wrong, but at least the path was clear. I ran the entire way back to my car without stopping. I kept expecting to hear footsteps behind me, but there was only my breathing and the slapping sound of my boots hitting dirt. When I reached my car, I threw my pack in, slammed the door, and locked it. I sat there with my hands shaking so hard I could barely grip the steering wheel. I looked at the line of trees for a long time before I drove away, half expecting to see something watching me from the shadows. I reported what I found the next day. The torn jacket, the broken gear, the footprints, the clearing. A search team went out, but they didn't find anything except the jacket. Everything else, every single thing I saw was gone. No prints, no broken gear, no dragged marks in the mud. Not even the weird clearing looked the same. It was just normal forest floor, like nothing had ever happened there. I don't hike alone anymore. I don't pick random trails. And sometimes, late at night, when everything is quiet and the air feels heavy, I remember that soft, careful sound of weight shifting in the woods behind me. And I remind myself that whatever made those sounds in that forest was real, and it was close, and someone else found it before I did. And I was only able to leave because I didn't stay long enough for it to finish whatever it had started. I started that hike on a cold morning in late autumn, the sort of morning when the air feels sharp in your chest and the sky looks like a washed-out sheet of steel. I had been feeling restless for weeks, and I wanted a long trail where I could walk for hours without seeing anyone. I chose a route that cut through a large forested ridge system, a place I had only visited once before. The trail wasn't dangerous or famous or anything like that, just long and quiet, with a lot of steep climbs and narrow passes where the trees grew thick on both sides. I liked that kind of place because it made me feel far away from everything. I parked my car near the edge of a gravel service road and stepped into the woods. The first hour felt normal. The sun rose slowly behind a line of tall pines, and the trail under my boots was soft with old needles. I could hear small rustles in the brush where birds were moving, and the distant crack of branches falling somewhere deeper in the trees. It all felt peaceful in that early part of the morning. I moved fast, keeping my pace steady, watching my breath drift in front of me in small clouds. By late morning, the wind changed. It wasn't strong, but it had that strange tone that sometimes comes through forests when the air shifts direction. It made the treetops sway in slow waves, and I kept hearing faint groans from the branches. The sky got darker even though it wasn't supposed to rain. I checked the weather before leaving, and it had looked clear. Still, the gray light made the woods feel heavier somehow, like the whole place was tightening around me. A few hours in, I noticed something odd. The trail, which was usually wide enough for two people to walk side by side, started to get narrow and uneven. It looked like no one had used it in a long time. I kept going because the map showed it would open up again on the ridge ahead. But the ground felt different under my shoes. Instead of firm soil and roots, I felt soft patches that sank slightly under my weight. I thought maybe the last rain had softened the earth more than I expected, but the feeling stayed consistent, like the trail itself was losing structure. Around then, I started seeing signs of older things, small details that didn't fit with a common hiking path. There were pieces of broken wood sticking out of the soil, not branches but old wood that looked cut by someone a long time ago. Some of them were buried deep, with only the ends sticking out. I noticed rusty metal bolts and a thin loop of wire tangled around a tree trunk. It made me think that maybe the trail used to run through an area where people had tried building something decades back, maybe a fence or some old structure. I kept hiking uphill and the silence grew heavier. Even the birds had stopped. It was strange because usually there is always some noise in a forest. But at that moment, the only sound was the crunch of my boots. I tried to ignore it, but it made my steps feel too loud, like I was disturbing something I shouldn't disturb. When I reached a steep section, the ground suddenly shifted under me. My right foot slid forward, and I fell onto my hands. The soil under the top layer had collapsed like loose sand. When I looked closer, I saw that the ground was filled with more old wood pieces, rotten and crumbling. I realized I had stepped onto the remains of something buried. A platform, maybe, or an old walkway. The wood was too thin and too broken to hold weight anymore. I pulled myself up and moved more carefully after that. As I climbed higher, the trail turned into a narrow ledge along the side of the ridge. The drop wasn't huge, but it was steep enough to hurt badly if I fell. The wind was stronger up there, pressing against me. The trees were thinner, and I could see glimpses of long valleys stretching out under the gray sky. Something about the emptiness of that view made me feel exposed. I kept walking until the ledge widened again, opening into a flat clearing. At first, I was relieved to see level ground, but the clearing didn't look natural. The trees around it formed a circle that felt too perfect. The soil inside the clearing was loose and darker than the rest of the forest floor. When I stepped on it, I felt the same soft sinking sensation from earlier. It reminded me of standing on top of a place where the ground didn't want to support anything. That was the first moment I felt real fear instead of discomfort. I had the strong sense that I shouldn't be standing there. I saw more rusted metal sticking out of the dirt, and the remains of a wooden beam half buried at an angle. I didn't know what had been here before, but it didn't feel like a campsite or a cabin. It felt like something had collapsed here long ago, something large. I left the clearing quickly and returned to the trail. But after a few minutes, I realized the trail was changing again. The edges were losing shape. It didn't look like a path made by people anymore, but more like an animal track that split and twisted in ways that didn't match the map. The deeper I went, the stronger the sense grew that I wasn't on any official trail at all. I had followed the wrong branch somewhere. My heartbeat sped up. I didn't want to panic, but I felt the air thicken around me. Every tree looked the same. I tried to stay calm and just retrace my steps, but the ground behind me looked no more familiar than the ground ahead. The light kept fading even though it wasn't late yet. My legs were getting tired, and the strange soft ground made every step feel uncertain. When I realized I had been walking in a slow arc instead of a straight line, something inside me turned cold. My phone had no signal. I checked it over and over even though I already knew it wouldn't change. The forest had grown so quiet that the sound of my own breathing felt too loud. I could feel sweat building on my back even though the air was cold. I decided to stop moving for a moment. I stood still and listened. That was when I heard the first distant crack. It came from deep within the trees behind me. At first, I thought it was just another falling branch, but then I heard another one closer, and then another. They weren't random breaks. They were spaced apart in a way that felt deliberate, like something large was moving slowly but steadily in my direction, snapping old branches under its weight. I didn't wait to find out what it was. I turned and moved as quietly and quickly as I could, heading toward the direction where I thought the ridge dropped down on the side closer to the road. The forest felt tighter around me, and the ground sloped dangerously. I almost slipped twice on loose soil. My legs were shaking, and every sound behind me made my stomach twist. Eventually, I saw a break in the trees where the slope fell sharply downward. I knew sliding down it would be painful, but staying where I was felt worse. I crouched and let myself slide, grabbing at roots and rocks to slow myself so I wouldn't hit anything too hard. Dirt filled my shoes, and my hands burned from grabbing rough bark, but I kept going until the slope leveled out again. At the bottom, I found a dry stream bed, wide and rocky. I followed it downhill because I knew streams usually lead toward roads or open areas. The sky was even darker now, and the woods around me looked almost black. I kept going for what felt like an hour until I finally saw something that didn't belong to the forest. The edge of a rusted service gate. When I reached it, I felt the kind of relief that hits so hard it almost makes your legs go weak. Beyond the gate was the gravel service road where I had parked. My car was still there, silent and cold. The moment I touched the door handle, I felt like the entire weight of the forest finally lifted off my shoulders. I sat in the driver's seat, breathing hard, my clothes dirty and ripped, my arms scratched from sliding down the ridge. I stayed there for a long time before starting the engine. I didn't look back at the trees. I didn't want to see if anything was moving between them. When I finally drove away, the fear didn't fade right away. It stayed with me through the entire drive home, and even later that night I still felt that sinking ground under my feet, that soft and unstable earth hiding old things beneath it. I don't know what that place used to be or how far I walked off the real trail, but I know how it felt. It felt like the forest had been waiting for someone to step where they shouldn't, and I almost stayed there long enough to find out what would have happened if I hadn't left when I did. I never went back to that ridge again, and I never will. I went hiking alone in a place I didn't know very well. I picked it at random on a map the night before because I wanted to be far from people, far from noise, and far from everything that had been crowding my head. It was a stretch of hills and deep forest with narrow trails that twisted through the trees like thin veins. I remember feeling excited when I parked the car near the treeline. The air felt cold and clean, and the whole area looked empty, which was exactly what I wanted. I packed light, kept only what I needed, and stepped onto the path without thinking twice. The first hour felt peaceful. The trail dipped and rose gently, and the dirt under my boots was dry and soft. I could hear birds somewhere far above me, and every once in a while I saw a squirrel run across the path and disappear into the brush. The deeper I went, the quieter it became. The forest swallowed sound in a strange way, like the trees were blocking the world behind me. I kept walking because I wanted to see how far the trail went, even though the map I brought wasn't very clear. The lines on it were faded, and some parts were torn. I didn't care. I thought it would be simple enough to follow the painted trail markers nailed onto the trees. After a while, they started getting harder to find. The paint on many of them had chipped off over time, leaving only faint colors. Sometimes I had to stand still and scan the trees for several minutes just to find the next one. When I couldn't find any, I followed what I thought looked like a continued path. Even though the ground was starting to look less like a trail and more like untouched forest floor, the sky was hidden behind thick branches, and the light that came through was dim and uneven. It made everything look a little distorted, like the shadows wanted to stretch across the ground and twist around my feet. At some point, I noticed that the ground had become uneven. Rocks and roots stuck out everywhere. I had to slow down because each step felt like it could be a wrong one. My backpack straps dug into my shoulders more than before, and sweat started to form under my shirt even though the air felt cold. I kept going until I realized something that made my stomach drop. I hadn't seen a trail marker for a long time. Too long. I stopped walking and looked around. The trees looked the same in every direction. There was no clear path behind me either, just scattered leaves and patches of exposed soil. It hit me hard. I had walked straight off the trail without noticing. I tried to calm myself by walking back the way I thought I came. I tried to look for familiar shapes in the trees or a footprint in the dirt. But the forest floor was a mess of leaves and twigs, and nothing showed my tracks. The silence felt heavier now, not peaceful like before, but thick and tense. Every rustle made my muscles tighten. I kept moving anyway, trying to convince myself I wasn't lost, even though the panic was starting to press against my throat. I walked in one direction for what felt like half an hour. The ground sloped downward until I reached a narrow, dried-out creek bed. I decided to follow it because at least it was something that led somewhere. The walls of the creek were steep and covered in moss, and I had to watch my steps carefully so I wouldn't slip. The deeper I went along it, the darker the forest felt. The branches above me formed a tangled ceiling that blocked most of the sky. That was when I first heard it, a sound that didn't fit the forest. It was light, but sharp, like something snapping under weight, came from behind me. I froze. I waited to hear it again, but the forest went quiet. I stood there breathing slowly, trying not to panic. I told myself it was probably an animal. A deer, maybe. Something harmless. But my body didn't believe it. My legs felt stiff, and a cold rush spread across my back. I kept walking, forcing my steps to stay steady. After a minute, I heard the sound again. This time it was closer. Not loud, but close. Something stepping on dry wood, careful but heavy enough that it couldn't hide completely. I didn't turn around. I just kept moving, faster now, almost tripping over rocks as I followed the creek. The creek bed widened ahead, and I climbed out of it onto flatter ground. The forest here looked older. The trees were thicker, and the branches formed walls on both sides. I stopped to take a breath, but then I saw something in the dirt that made me kneel down. It was a footprint, not mine, bigger, deeper, fresh. The edges were clean, not softened by wind or fallen leaves. My heart started thumping so hard I could feel it in my neck. I stood up and looked around slowly. Nothing moved, but I could feel that I wasn't alone anymore. I didn't know who else would be out here. There were no campsites nearby, no houses, no signs of people at all. The footprint pointed in the same direction I had just come from. That meant whoever made it had been walking behind me at some point. I moved again, this time with real fear pushing me forward. My breathing got faster and louder, and every couple of steps I looked over my shoulder even though I didn't want to. My boots scraped against the ground as I hurried, trying to find anything that looked like a way out. After several minutes, the trees thinned slightly, and I saw what looked like a man-made cut in the forest. It wasn't a road, just a rough opening, like an old service path that hadn't been used in years. I ran toward it. The branches scratched my arms, and the brush pulled at my clothes. The moment I stepped onto that open stretch, I felt a sharp jolt of relief. At least it was straight. At least it went somewhere. I followed it until the forest started to open wider, and finally, in the distance, I saw the faint glint of something metallic. My car's roof reflecting the light. I kept walking until my legs almost collapsed. When I reached the car, my hands trembled so hard I almost dropped the keys. I didn't look back at the forest. I didn't want to know if someone, or something real, was standing there watching me. When I finally sat inside the car and locked the doors, the weight in my chest loosened just enough for me to breathe normally again. It took me a while to start the engine because I needed a minute to understand what had happened. I wasn't attacked. I wasn't touched. But I wasn't alone in those trees. Someone else was there, moving when I moved, stopping when I stopped, following me without a single sound except those 2 steps I couldn't ignore. The footprint wasn't an animal. It wasn't mine. Someone was walking behind me the whole time, close enough that if I had stopped for just a little longer, they could have reached me. That thought stayed with me long after I drove away, and still now, even writing this, I can feel the same cold rush on my back that I felt in that forest. I don't know who it was. I don't want to know. All I know is that I was lucky I kept moving, lucky I didn't freeze, lucky I found that old path when I did. Because if I had waited even a few minutes more in that quiet, empty forest, I don't think I would have walked out of it at all. I went hiking alone on a random Saturday morning, the kind of morning where the air feels still and cold in a way that makes you notice every small sound around you. I remember the sky being a pale gray, almost white, like the sun was trying to break through but kept getting pushed back. I picked a trail I had never tried before, one that cut deep into old forest with no real signs except a faint wooden arrow at the entrance. I wanted something quiet and simple, a long walk to clear my head, nothing more. I had no idea how different the day would turn out. The first mile of the hike felt normal. The ground was soft with old pine needles, and the smell of damp wood hung in the air. I liked that smell. It reminded me of older days when things felt easier. I could hear the low sound of a river somewhere far off, a steady rush that echoed between the trees. The forest was dense, thicker than I expected, with tall trunks rising straight up like pillars inside a huge dark hall. Everything felt calm. As I walked deeper, The light behind me faded in a way I didn't expect. It wasn't getting dark outside, but the trees were so close together that the daylight thinned out until it looked like late afternoon. I kept going anyway. I always had a habit of pushing forward even when little things told me to turn around. I told myself it was just a new trail and I should give it a chance. About an hour in, I started noticing something strange. The forest floor looked disturbed in places, not like animal tracks or normal wear, but long dragging marks close to the ground. At first I ignored them. I assumed it was from fallen branches pulled downhill by rain. But as I kept moving, I saw more of them. Thin lines in the dirt, always heading in the same direction I was going. Something about them felt off. They were too straight and too long, like something had been pulled along the ground for a long distance. I tried to shake the feeling building inside me. I slowed my steps and listened. The forest, which had been full of soft sounds earlier, felt unusually quiet now. No birds, no distant river noise, nothing. Just the faint sound of my own breathing and the crunch of dry leaves under my boots. That silence always feels heavy, like the woods are holding their breath. The trail narrowed after a while, almost like fewer people walked this part. The branches hung lower, some brushing the top of my backpack. The dragging marks appeared more often now, cutting across the path again and again. I started noticing broken twigs on both sides of the trail, snapped at the same height, like something had passed through that was too low to the ground to be a person but too high to be a normal animal. I felt a cold pressure in my chest but kept walking. I didn't want to turn back yet, even though I knew I probably should have. I wanted to see where the trail led. I told myself I was being dramatic, that the forest always looked strange when you went deep enough into it. Not long after, I smelled something faint but sharp, like metal mixed with wet dirt. It reminded me of blood but older, almost rust-like. I slowed down and looked around, but I couldn't see anything. The smell wasn't strong, just enough to make me pause and breathe more carefully. As I walked farther, the dragging marks turned into patches where the dirt looked overturned, like something heavy had rolled or been pulled through. The trees in this area were spaced out differently, almost as if something had pushed its way between them again and again, leaving a faint path that ran parallel to mine. I didn't like how it seemed to follow the trail from the trees, moving the same direction I was going. My steps got slower. Each breath felt heavier. I felt watched even though there was nothing I could point to. It wasn't a supernatural feeling, just that deep, instinctive sense your body gives you when something is off. I kept scanning the woods on either side of me, trying to catch any sign of movement. About 2 more miles in, the forest opened into a small clearing. The dirt in the center was smooth, too smooth, like the ground had been scraped flat. No grass, no leaves, nothing. It looked out of place in the middle of thick woods. I walked near the edge and crouched to touch it. The dirt was cold and hard-packed, and there were marks at the edges. Deep grooves that looked like heavy objects had been dragged in circles. That was the moment the fear really started to build. My body felt warm, but my hands were shaking a little. Everything in me said to turn around. I stood up slowly and looked back at the trail I came from. It looked darker than before, almost tunnel-like, as if the trees had closed in while I wasn't paying attention. I decided to leave. I didn't run, but I walked fast, keeping my steps steady and controlled. Every sound made me tense. I kept glancing to my right where that faint path ran through the trees. I saw nothing moving, but I felt something was there. The woods no longer felt empty. The silence had a weight to it, like it was pressing against my ears. Halfway back, I saw something that made my stomach twist. On the side of the trail, a section of dirt looked freshly disturbed. Whatever had made the dragging marks earlier had crossed the path right there. The prints beside the drag were wide, almost rounded, not like hooves, not like paws, and spaced strangely far apart. I stared at them too long. My mind tried to make them fit something familiar, but nothing matched. I kept moving. My steps were faster now. My breathing got uneven. The forest felt tighter, darker, and that metal smell drifted through the air again, almost stronger this time. I listened hard, trying to tell if something was behind me, but all I heard was the pounding of my own heartbeat. I didn't stop again until I saw the first bit of brighter light through the trees. That meant I was close to the trail entrance. The air felt fresher there, like I had stepped out of something thick and suffocating. When I reached the start of the trail, I stopped and turned around one last time. The forest behind me looked normal again, just a quiet path disappearing into the trees. No dragging marks were visible from where I stood. No strange smell, no strange prints, just forest. But the feeling didn't leave. Even after I walked back to my car, even after I started driving home, even when I finally reached my house, that feeling stayed. It felt like something had followed me to the edge of the woods and then stopped, standing just out of sight, watching me walk away. I never went back to that trail again. I didn't report anything or tell anyone because I didn't know what to say. There was nothing supernatural about it, nothing impossible, but something real was out there. Something that moved in ways I couldn't understand. Something that traveled low to the ground and left those long dragging marks behind. The ending became clear to me days later. The dragging marks weren't from something being carried. They were from something moving. And whatever it was, I had walked right alongside it for miles without ever seeing it. I started the hike early in the morning, long before the sun pushed through the clouds. I picked the trail at random, something I almost never do, but that day I felt like I needed to get away from people and noise. The air felt cold and sharp, and the path looked rough but quiet, which was exactly what I wanted. I had my pack tight on my shoulders and enough water and food for a full day. I thought it would be a simple trip, maybe a tiring one, but still normal. I didn't realize how fast things could turn once I stepped deeper into the woods. The first hour felt peaceful. The forest was thick, and the tall trees blocked most of the sky. The ground was damp from rain the night before, and the smell of wet soil hung around me. Every step pressed into soft earth. After about 2 hours, the trail started to narrow and the trees crowded closer. I noticed how quiet it became. No birds, no wind, no insects buzzing. Just the sound of my boots moving over the ground. That silence made me feel like something was off, but I kept going because turning back so early felt pointless. I followed the trail as it climbed a steep hill. The higher I went, the stranger things felt. The air grew still, heavy in a way that made me breathe slower. I could see the trail bending around a small ridge, so I moved toward it, thinking I would stop there and drink some water. When I reached the top, I froze. The trail split into 2 thin paths. Both looked worn, but not in the same way. The one on the left looked like it had been used more recently. The one on the right looked older, rougher, covered in fallen branches. I should have taken the left side, but for some reason, I stepped onto the right one. Maybe I wanted more quiet. Maybe I thought it looked more interesting. I didn't think about danger. I should have. About 30 minutes into that old trail, the forest changed again. The trees seemed to grow closer together until they blocked out most of the light. The path was so narrow that branches scraped my arms as I moved. The ground turned uneven and rocky. Each step felt like a small risk. I slowed down, trying to place my feet carefully. The silence felt even heavier. It pressed against my ears until I thought I could hear my own heartbeat echoing inside my head. Then I saw the footprints. They were fresh, deep in the soft dirt. They were from boots, but not hiking boots, something heavy, wide, and flat. There were no other footprints leading back the way they came. Just one set going forward. That meant someone had walked into this area but hadn't walked out. I didn't like that feeling. My stomach tightened, and I wished I had never taken that turn. I kept walking because I didn't want to stand still in that silence. I told myself the prints belonged to a hunter or a ranger, someone doing normal work. I tried to believe it, but the deeper I went, the worse my instincts felt. Every few minutes, I stopped and looked around, but nothing moved. No sound at all. After another long stretch, I reached a small clearing. The footprints led straight across it. In the center of the clearing, I saw something that made the hairs on my neck rise. A broken backpack torn open down the middle. The pockets were ripped apart, and the straps were frayed like they had been yanked hard. The fabric looked fresh, not weathered, not old. A water bottle lay beside it, dented on one side, as if someone had thrown it or dropped it fast. I didn't see any blood, but the scene looked wrong. It looked like someone had been in a hurry, someone who didn't get the chance to pick anything back up. I backed away from the clearing slowly. My heart beat so fast I felt it in my teeth. I wanted to turn around and run, but running in a forest this dense was dangerous. I forced myself to walk, fast but steady, all the way back to the trail split. The whole time I felt watched. I kept turning my head, expecting to see someone standing behind a tree, but the woods stayed empty. When I reached the split, I stopped to catch my breath. My legs shook, and sweat soaked through my shirt. I looked down the left trail, the one I should have taken from the start. It looked open and normal. That calmed me a little, so I followed it, thinking it would lead back toward the main route. After about 10 minutes, I noticed something that made my stomach drop again. The same footprints. Fresh, deep, the same shape, the same direction. But this time they weren't ahead of me. They were behind me. They followed my path from the split, as if someone had been walking the same way I had just walked, only a few minutes after me. I didn't hear anyone. I didn't see anyone. But the footprints were there, pressed into the dirt, newer than any I had made earlier. The thought hit me hard. Whoever made those prints had been close. Very close. Close enough to follow without making a sound. I didn't waste another second. I pushed forward down the trail, moving as fast as the terrain allowed. My lungs burned, and my legs felt weak, but fear kept me going. Every few minutes, I looked behind me. The trail stayed empty, but that didn't help. The woods felt alive around me, like something was staying just far enough back that I couldn't catch it with my eyes. For almost an hour, I kept that pace until the trees finally started to thin. I saw sunlight breaking through ahead. When I stepped out of the woods and reached the gravel near the parking area, I felt like someone had taken a weight off my chest. There were no fresh footprints on the gravel. No sign of anyone following. No sound except the distant noise of cars on the highway. Everything looked normal, calm, safe. But when I looked back at the trail entrance, I noticed something small in the dirt right at the edge. A fresh boot print. The same shape, the same depth, the same direction. Stopping right at the tree line. Whoever had followed me had come all the way to the edge of the forest, and then stopped. They didn't step out. They didn't walk to the parking lot. They just stood there, hidden behind the trees, watching me leave. I never went back to that trail again. I still don't know who made those footprints or what happened to the person whose backpack was torn open in that clearing. All I know is that someone was behind me in those woods, close enough to trail me step for step, but quiet enough that I never heard them once. And the scariest part is how they stopped right at the edge, like they only wanted me as long as I stayed inside the forest, like they had rules about where they could follow. I walked away that day, but I still think about how easily it could have gone the other way. I went on that hike because I felt like my mind was getting too loud. I wanted a long trail, something far from people, something that would make my legs burn enough to drown out the rest of the noise. I picked a route that cut deep through a mountain range I had never been in before, a place where the trail looked thin and the trees pressed close together on every side. I packed light because I thought it would be an easy 2-day loop, nothing special, just woods, silence, and the kind of steady walking that clears my head. I didn't think the trail itself would become the thing I needed to escape. The first few hours were the exact kind of quiet I wanted. The forest felt heavy but calm, with tall trees rising straight up like walls on both sides. The path was narrow but clear, and the air had that cold smell of wet soil and old bark. Every step sank just a little into the dirt. I kept a slow pace, taking in the way the sunlight cut through the branches in thin slices. I thought the whole hike would feel like that, simple, steady, peaceful. About halfway through the first day, the forest changed a little. The trees got closer together, the ground dipped more often, and the wind stopped making any sound. Even the birds went quiet. I tried to ignore it, but I kept glancing over my shoulder without meaning to. Every time I looked, it was just the same thick woods behind me, the kind where the shadows blend together so much that the spaces between the trunks look deeper than they should. I told myself it was nothing, Just a new kind of forest. Just my mind trying to fill the silence. A few hours later, something felt wrong with the trail itself. It had been fairly smooth before, but suddenly there were deep marks in the dirt. Not footprints, not tire tracks, just long dragged lines, as if something heavy had been pulled through the mud while the ground was still wet. They ran right down the middle of the path, weaving left and right like whoever dragged it couldn't keep it straight. They looked old, but not too old. The edges weren't dry yet. I stepped around them and kept walking, but the lines stayed with the trail for a long time, almost like they were following me rather than the other way around. I tried to shake the feeling talking to me from the back of my mind, the part that kept saying the woods felt too empty, too still. At one point, I stopped to drink water and I felt something shift under my feet. When I looked down, the dirt wasn't flat. It had these faint bumps, like small mounds, scattered around the base of the trees. They weren't rocks. They looked like disturbed soil, places where the ground had been dug up and then smoothed over again. I knelt down to touch one, and the soil was softer than the rest, almost loose. I moved on quickly after that because I didn't like how shallow the mound was, or how the ground underneath it felt like it was hollowing out. The deeper I went, the more the trail felt like it was sinking. The path began to slope downward into a long, narrow valley. The trees leaned toward each other overhead until the light barely reached the ground. The air smelled different too, less like forest and more like something damp and sour. I kept walking, but I could feel a slow pressure building in my chest, like the forest was pushing against me. I kept hearing small noises behind me, not big steps, just tiny breaks in the leaves, small quick sounds like something light was moving just out of sight. Every time I stopped, the sound stopped too. But once I started again, it came back. Later in the afternoon, I found a wide patch of dirt where the dropped leaves had been cleared away by something other than wind. The ground there was scraped smooth, with faint marks of something being dragged across it. At the far end of the clearing, I saw a tree with deep scratches down the bark, straight thin lines from about my height down to the soil. They weren't claw marks. They looked made by metal. I didn't want to get any closer. I felt like I had walked into a place something else had been using, something that didn't expect me to find it. I kept going because the trail didn't give many choices. It led straight through the valley, then curved around to the right where the trees opened into a narrow slope. As I climbed the slope, I felt the air get colder. My skin prickled even though the sun hadn't gone down yet. The noises behind me never got louder, but they never stopped either. It was always small, quick movements. Tiny cracks of twigs or the soft hiss of leaves brushing against something that wasn't the wind. It stayed at the same distance no matter how fast I walked. When evening came, the trail finally rose out of the valley and reached higher ground with bigger trees and more open space between them. But I didn't feel any safer. If anything, the openness made me feel watched from farther away. I could see more, but I couldn't see enough. I set up camp much earlier than I planned because the shadows were getting too long, and I felt tired in a way that wasn't just physical. I didn't build a fire because the forest already felt too alert, and I didn't want to draw attention to myself. That night, the sounds came back, but they were different now. Instead of quick little noises, I heard slow steps moving around my campsite from a distance. The steps weren't heavy, but they were steady, like someone walking in a slow circle around me. The circle widened and tightened at random, like whoever was moving didn't care if I heard or not. At one point, something stepped close enough that I heard the soil shift under its weight. I lay still in my sleeping bag, staring at the thin fabric of my tent as if it could protect me. I kept holding my breath, hoping the steps would fade. They did fade, but not far. I listened until the sun finally started to rise, and I never heard them stop completely. I packed my things in the cold gray light before the sun even broke through the trees. I moved fast because I couldn't shake the feeling that if I slowed down, something would come up behind me. The trail ahead looked longer and darker than I remembered studying on the map, but I didn't want to stay another night. I followed it with a constant pressure in my ribs, like a hand was pressing against them from the inside. About an hour into the morning, I found fresh marks on the trail. Not the dragged lines from before, these were footprints, but they weren't mine. They were small, barefoot prints pressed deep into the soil as if whoever made them was running. They led straight ahead on the trail, then veered off into the woods at a sharp angle. When I leaned closer, I saw dirt scattered outward like the person slipped or was pulled sideways. The marks dragged into the trees for a few feet and then stopped completely. I didn't want to look any deeper. I just kept moving. The forest around me felt like it was tightening. The trees leaned closer, the ground seemed softer in places, and the air carried that same sour smell from the valley. Even though it was daylight, the sun barely reached the ground. The noises came back too, small at first, then more frequent, like whoever had followed me the day before was moving faster now, closing the distance bit by bit. About midday, I felt the ground shift under me again. Not a small mound this time, something bigger. The dirt sank slightly under my foot like there was an empty space below it. I stepped back fast and saw the soil crack in a circle, as if the earth had been hollowed out underneath. I didn't stick around to see why. I walked faster, then jogged, then ran. When I finally reached higher ground where the trees opened up and the mountain wind finally touched my face, I felt like the pressure around me broke. The noises behind me stopped. The forest quieted in a natural way again, not the thick, watching silence from before. My chest loosened for the first time in almost a full day, and I kept running until the trail widened and I saw distant signs of the access road. When I reached the road, I didn't stop. I kept walking until my legs were shaking and my pack was cutting into my shoulders because I wanted as much distance as possible between me and that valley. When I finally made it back to my car, I felt a deep relief that hit so hard I had to sit down for a minute before starting the engine. The ending stayed clear in my mind the whole drive home. I didn't see whatever had followed me. I didn't want to, but I know it was there. I know it watched me for hours without making a single mistake. I know those mounds in the dirt weren't random. I know those dragged lines weren't from an animal. And I know for a fact that something walked in slow circles around my tent all night without ever stepping close enough for me to see it. I didn't go back to that trail. I don't plan to. And the scariest part isn't the things I heard. It's what I didn't hear. The moments when the forest went completely still, as if whatever was moving had finally stopped to watch me breathe. That silence is the only thing I still hear sometimes. It's the clearest reminder that whatever was out there was real, and it wanted me to know it. I went out for a simple hike that morning. Nothing special, just a random trail I picked from a list on my phone. I wanted something quiet, something far from the noise of the city. The trail I chose was deep in a wooded area I had never visited before, a place people said was peaceful and empty most of the year. I packed light water, snacks, a small first aid kit, and an old flashlight I kept in my backpack just in case. The weather was perfect, cool and dry, with a calm gray sky that made the forest look even denser and darker than usual. The first part of the hike felt easy. The trail was narrow but clear, packed with dry leaves that cracked under my boots. The trees were tall, thin, and packed tightly together, with long branches crossing over my head like tangled fingers. I liked that feeling of being tucked inside the woods, wrapped up in the silence that you can only get far from people. For a long time, all I heard was the soft crunch of leaves, the rustle of branches above me, and the slow, steady sound of my own breathing. About an hour in, I noticed the trail starting to fade. It didn't disappear all at once. It just slowly got thinner and less obvious. The earth looked more disturbed, as if people rarely walked past that point. I kept going because the forest still looked manageable from where I stood. The ground was sloped but not steep, and I felt confident I would find the path again if I just kept moving forward. I walked deeper, and the trees started changing. Their spacing got uneven, some areas open and others so tight I had to turn my shoulders to pass through. The air grew heavier, thicker, almost damp, even though the weather had been dry when I started. The ground turned soft under my shoes, patches of dark soil sinking slightly with each step. I tried to figure out if I had walked downhill without noticing, because it felt like lower land where water usually collects. I kept moving forward until I realized something was off. I hadn't seen a trail marker in a long time. I looked around and couldn't even tell which direction I had come from because everything looked the same. The trees stood so close to each other and so perfectly still that they almost felt like they were watching me, waiting for me to decide which way to go. I checked my phone, but there was no signal, not even a tiny bar. The battery was still high, but the map wouldn't load. That was the moment I understood I was actually lost. Not just a little turned around, but fully lost in a place I didn't know at all. I tried to stay calm. I stood still and slowly turned in a full circle, studying every possible path. There was one opening between the trees that looked a bit clearer than the rest, so I headed that way. The ground sloped down, and the soil turned muddy. I stepped carefully to avoid slipping, but the deeper I went, the softer the earth became. My boots sank in with each step, and I had to pull them out with force, making wet sucking sounds that echoed strangely in the quiet woods. As I kept going, I noticed something strange in the mud. Tracks. Not animal tracks, not boot prints either. They looked like uneven impressions, wider than a shoe, almost like someone had walked there dragging something heavy behind them. The prints were old, edges softened by rain or time, but they definitely didn't belong to any animal I knew. The longer I stared at them, the more uncomfortable I felt. They went forward, deeper into the trees. I felt a strong pull inside me telling me not to follow those tracks, but I didn't have many options. Everything around me looked the same, and these tracks were the only sign that something, anything, had passed through recently enough to leave marks. I followed them slowly, watching each step. The forest changed again. The trees were thicker, the branches lower, the air cooler. The light grew dim even though it wasn't late. The silence got so strong it felt physical, like the sound had been sucked out of the air. Every small noise I made seemed too loud. Every twig that snapped under my foot made my heart jump. A few minutes later, the tracks stopped at a fallen tree. The mud around it looked disturbed, but there were no more prints beyond that point. It was like something had climbed over the log and vanished. I stepped closer to look, and that was when I smelled it. A heavy, sour smell, like old sweat and wet metal mixed together. It came from the other side of the fallen tree. That smell made every hair on my arms rise. I didn't want to see what was making it. I didn't want to be anywhere near it. I stepped back slowly, keeping my eyes on the log even though nothing moved. I didn't hear anything, but the smell felt too fresh for my comfort. Something had been there recently, very recently. I turned around and started walking fast in the direction I came from, not caring about the mud or the branches scraping my arms. I just wanted to put distance between myself and that smell. I moved uphill, trying to follow the slope back to higher ground. I kept going until the mud turned to firm soil again, and the trees spread out a little more. But the forest was different now. Every shadow looked too deep. Every movement of the branches made me tense. I kept feeling like something was behind me, following slowly, matching my steps, staying just out of sight. I never saw anything when I turned around, but the feeling wouldn't go away. It built inside me like pressure, tightening my chest, making me breathe faster. I walked for what felt like hours, trying to find any sign of the trail. I kept checking the ground for familiar shapes, for footprints, for anything that looked human. The forest didn't help me. Everything looked wrong, tilted, twisted, as if the deeper I went, the more the landscape was shifting without me noticing. Just when I started to feel real panic rising, I spotted something out of place. A sliver of bright color through the trees. I pushed through a thick patch of branches and stepped out onto the old trail. The ground was solid again, dry leaves covering the dirt in a way that looked normal and familiar. The smell was gone. The feeling of being followed faded a little, but not fully. I walked quickly, almost jogging, keeping my eyes on the path and counting every step. The trail widened the closer I got to the entry point, and at last I saw the small wooden sign where the hike had started. When I reached my car, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief wash over me, but the tension didn't leave my body completely. I could still feel that quiet pressure on the back of my neck, like something had been standing too close for too long. I left the area fast. As soon as I got on the main road, the forest seemed to fall away behind me, shrinking into the distance. The farther I drove, the lighter my chest felt, but even now, I can still remember the smell, the tracks in the mud, and that heavy silence. I know I wasn't alone out there, and whatever was in those woods that day was something real, something I don't ever want to cross paths with again. I started the hike late in the afternoon, much later than I should have, but I had convinced myself it would be fine. I told myself it was just a short trail cutting across a broad mountain ridge, something I had done 1,000 times before. I wanted the quiet more than anything. My mind felt heavy all week, and the thought of being alone in the woods seemed like the only thing that could calm me. The air was cool and dry, and the sky had that pale look that comes right before the sun starts sinking. I didn't think much of it at the time. I thought I could make it to the far side of the ridge before darkness really settled in. At first, the trail looked normal. Packed dirt, dead pine needles, a few old rocks sticking up here and there like they always do. Every step felt familiar, but I noticed early on that the woods were quieter than usual. No birds, no insects, nothing moving in the trees. It felt like walking into a room after someone just left, like the air still held the shape of something unseen. I kept going anyway. I told myself I was just imagining it. After about 20 minutes, the trail got steep. The dirt was dry and loose, and every step slid a little. My backpack shifted on my shoulders, making me lean forward more than I wanted to. I could feel sweat forming on my back even though the air was cool. My legs felt tight. I slowed down, but I didn't stop. I didn't want to stop. Stopping in a place that quiet made me feel like I was doing something wrong. When I reached the ridge, the light was already dropping faster than I expected. The trees here grew closer together, tall and thin, with branches that twisted low to the ground. The trail narrowed until it was just a thin strip of dirt between roots. I felt like I had stepped into a different place entirely, like the world had shifted around me without warning. The ground smelled damp, as if it had just rained, even though the whole day had been dry. I kept moving, trying to keep my pace steady. The deeper I went, the more I started to notice small things that made my chest tighten. A broken boot print in the mud that didn't look fresh anymore. A torn piece of fabric hanging from a branch at shoulder height. A long, thin scratch running down the trunk of a tree, almost as if someone had dragged something sharp along it. None of these things were unusual by themselves. People hike through here all the time. But seeing them all together in a place this silent made me feel watched, even though I knew there was nobody around. I tried to control my breathing, but every breath felt louder than the last. My footsteps seemed to echo even though I was on soft ground. I kept checking behind me even though I knew there was nothing there. The shadows between the trees deepened fast, turning every shape into something uncertain. I felt my heartbeat in my throat, steady but heavy. About an hour in, I realized I wasn't sure if I was still on the right trail. The dirt path faded in some places, blending into the forest floor. Some sections were covered in fallen branches and dead leaves. I walked slower, checking the ground for any sign I was still heading the right way. I found a few bits of trail marker paint on trees, faded and peeling. Calmed me a little, but not much. I could feel a kind of pressure in the air now, like the entire woods were leaning in. Eventually, the trail dipped into a shallow valley. The air down there felt colder, and the trees grew so close that their branches touched overhead. It made a kind of tunnel that forced me to crouch as I walked. The ground was soft under my boots, almost sponge-like, as if water was just beneath the surface. I stepped carefully, but even then the earth sank a little each time. Halfway through the valley, I noticed footprints in the mud. Human footprints, deep ones. The kind you only leave when you're running or carrying something heavy. They pointed the same direction I was going, and they were spaced far apart. I felt the hair rise on the back of my neck. Something about them looked wrong. The edges were too sharp, too clean, as if they hadn't been disturbed at all, even though the air felt damp enough that they should have softened. My chest tightened again, worse this time. The valley stretched longer than I remembered from the map. Much longer. I kept waiting for the ground to start rising again, but it didn't. The air grew colder, and my fingers started to feel stiff even though I kept them inside my sleeves. I felt like I was sinking deeper into the woods instead of making any progress out of them. The sky was almost completely gone behind the branches now, and the dim light seemed to come from nowhere. When the ground finally started to climb again, my legs felt weak. I had been walking for hours with no real break. My mouth felt dry, and I could hear my heartbeat clearly in my ears. I pushed myself up the incline, grabbing roots to keep from sliding back. At the top, the forest opened slightly, just enough for a thin line of pale sky to show between the trees. I felt some relief at the sight, but it didn't last. Ahead of me, the trail ended. Not faded, not blocked. It just ended, like someone had cut it off. One moment I was walking on packed dirt, and the next I was standing in front of untouched forest floor. No footprints, no markers, nothing that showed where to go next. For a long moment, I just stood there, breathing hard, staring at the empty woods. My legs felt heavy, like they didn't want to move anymore. I turned slowly, looking for any sign of a split in the trail that I might have missed. But all I saw behind me was the same tight row of trees, still and silent. Then I noticed something that made my stomach drop. My own footprints behind me, every single one, looked sharp, fresh, and deep. Too deep, much deeper than they should have been for the way I walked. They looked almost identical to the prints I had seen earlier in the valley. Same shape, same depth, same spacing. I crouched and touched one of them. The mud inside the print felt firm, not soft, almost as if it had been pressed down a long time ago and hardened. But I had just made it. I stood up fast, breathing harder now. My body felt tight all over. I didn't know what was happening, but I knew I couldn't stay there. I turned back the way I came and started walking fast, almost jogging. The air felt heavier, thicker, like breathing through cloth. Every part of the forest looked the same, and the trail behind me seemed narrower than before. I kept moving, forcing myself not to stop, even when my legs felt like they were shaking. I followed my own footprints until they reached the valley again. By then, the darkness was almost complete. I used the dim light from my phone to guide my steps, even though the battery was almost dead. The valley floor felt even colder now, and the mud sucked at my boots with every step, as if trying to hold me there. But I didn't stop. I kept going, step after step after step, until I finally reached the ridge again. When I saw the first bit of open sky, even though it was nearly black, something inside me loosened. My legs still shook, but I forced myself forward until the trees finally thinned and the trail widened again. By the time I reached the trailhead, the sky was pitch black. My phone was dead. My clothes were damp with sweat and cold air. But I was out. The moment my boots hit the gravel near the parking area, I felt my body relax in a way that almost made me fall over. I didn't look back into the trees. I didn't want to see anything. I didn't want to know if something had followed me. I just walked straight to my car, started it with shaking hands, and drove away without taking a single breath inside the woods again. When I got home and looked at the map later, I tried to find the valley I had walked through and the place where the trail ended. Nothing matched. The ridge trail had no side valley, no sudden ending, no sharp turn I could have missed. Every part of it was clear and well marked. But I know what I walked through. I know what I saw. And the worst part, the part that stays with me every time I think about it, is that those footprints, those deep, clean footprints, matched mine exactly all the way down to the shape of the heel. I don't hike alone anymore. I started that hike because I wanted to clear my head. I picked a random trail on the map, a thin gray line that cut through a stretch of hills and thick forest. It looked quiet, far from towns and far from people, and at that time I thought that was exactly what I needed. I packed light, just a small tent, some food, extra water, a knife, and a headlamp. The trailhead sat off a narrow road where the tree line pressed right up to the dirt. The place felt empty the moment I stepped out of the car, like the air itself held back its breath. The trail started gentle, a steady climb through tall pines. The ground felt soft under my boots, covered with old needles that cushioned each step. The forest had that smell that only comes from trees that have stood in the same place for decades, maybe longer, damp bark, soil, and something old that I could never name. I walked slow, letting the silence sink in. The only sounds were the occasional crack of a stick under my foot and the faint rush of wind far above me, where the branches moved like slow waves. After about an hour, the trees grew closer together. The path narrowed and twisted between thick roots that climbed out of the soil like veins. I kept pushing forward because the map showed a small clearing not too far ahead, a spot that looked perfect for setting up camp. The deeper I went, the darker the forest became. It wasn't night yet, but the branches blocked out so much light that it felt like late evening. I could feel the temperature drop little by little until the air turned cool enough that I could see faint puffs when I breathed. I reached the clearing in the late afternoon. It wasn't as open as I imagined. It was more like a bowl carved into the woods, surrounded by trees so tall that they leaned inward. The ground was flat, though, and that was enough. I dropped my pack, stretched my legs, and started setting up the tent. The quiet there felt different than before, more heavy, like the forest was listening. I kept telling myself I was just tired and needed food. Once the tent was up, I ate, then sat on a fallen log and watched the last of the light fade through the branches. When night came fully, it came fast. The darkness felt thick, like the kind you get underground. I turned on my headlamp, but even its beam looked weak against the trees. I walked around camp a little to settle my nerves. The forest floor felt uneven, covered with old branches and rocks half buried under moss. Every now and then I stepped on something that cracked loudly, and each time it made my chest tighten like I had done something wrong. I tried to convince myself it was all in my head, but my instincts kept telling me something was off. I decided to get into the tent early. Lying there in the thin fabric shell, I could hear every sound around me, every shift of leaves, every soft thump somewhere out in the dark. Forests are noisy places at night, I knew that, but this wasn't the kind of noise that felt natural. It wasn't the usual rustling or small animals moving in the brush. It was slower, heavier, like something large taking careful steps on the ground. I held my breath and listened. The sound came again, a faint crunch of dry leaves being stepped on. It wasn't close, but it wasn't far either. It moved in a slow pattern, pausing for long stretches before starting again. I kept telling myself it was just a deer, maybe an elk, something normal, but the steps didn't match the rhythm I knew. They were too spaced apart, too deliberate, like someone trying not to be noticed. Time passed slow. I didn't sleep. I just stared at the roof of the tent, waiting for the sound to fade. Instead, I heard something else, a low scrape, like something dragging along the ground. It came from deeper in the woods, but it moved in long, steady pulls. I felt the hair on my arms rise even though I was zipped inside a sleeping bag. I tried to think of something rational that could make that noise. Nothing came to mind. I finally sat up, listening so hard my head hurt. The scrape stopped, and for a moment everything went quiet again. Then the heavy steps came back, but this time they were closer. I could feel them through the ground, faint vibrations that traveled through the soil and into the thin floor of the tent. I felt frozen, like any movement would draw the thing right to me. The steps circled the clearing. I couldn't see anything through the tent walls, but I pictured something tall, hidden between the trees, watching my camp. The worst part was how slowly it moved, almost like it was studying every part of the clearing. The steps would stop for a long time, then shift again, always in a careful arc around me. At one point, the sound came from directly behind the tent, close enough that I could hear the soft pressure of weight pressing into the ground. I stayed completely still, breathing shallow, trying not to make a sound. The thing stayed near the back of the tent for so long that my legs started to shake from holding tension. Then, finally, the steps continued around and faded deeper into the woods. I didn't relax. I just waited, sitting upright with my hand on my knife even though I knew the thin blade wouldn't do much. Hours passed before the forest settled again. I never slept. The moment the first gray light touched the tent walls, I unzipped the door and stepped out fast. The clearing looked normal at first, but when I walked to the back side of the tent, I froze. The ground was disturbed, not footprints, just patches of leaves pushed aside, areas of soil slightly compressed, like something heavy had stood there for a long time. The marks were too wide to be from a person and too deep for a deer. They weren't clean shapes, just impressions, but the size of them made my stomach drop. I didn't waste time packing. I shoved everything into my backpack, slung it over my shoulder, and started down the trail as fast as I could without breaking into a run. I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see something moving between the trees, but all I saw were the tall trunks and the thin morning light cutting through them. Even then, the forest still felt wrong, like the air carried something from the night before. The hike back felt twice as long. Every sound made me tense up. I didn't stop for water or rest. I just kept walking until the trees thinned and the trail opened back onto the narrow road where my car waited. Only when I sat inside and locked the doors did I feel like I could breathe again. I drove away fast and didn't look in the rearview mirror. I didn't care what I heard or thought I saw out there. I didn't care about the impressions in the ground or the slow movement around my camp. What mattered was leaving it behind. I haven't gone back to that trail. I don't plan to. I still hike, but I stick to places where people are never too far away. Because now I understand something I didn't before. The forest is big enough to hide things that don't need to be supernatural to be terrifying. Things that move slow, think slow, and watch from a distance long before you ever notice them. And sometimes the scariest part is realizing you were never alone out there, even when you thought you were.